Chapter 1. Arbor Court. There are buildings that exist without presence. Structures of glass and steel and poured concrete that fulfill their function, housing people, partitioning the world into private and shared, providing shelter from the weather and separation from strangers, without ever accumulating the quality that older buildings sometimes have, that quality of weight, of depth, of something that goes down further than its foundations. Arbor Court was not one of those buildings. Arbor Court was a mid-century residential block on the eastern edge of a medium-sized city, built in 1961, 7 stories, 42 apartments arranged on either side of a central corridor on each floor. It had been built during a period when the city was expanding rapidly and the demand for residential units outpaced the capacity for architectural consideration. It was functional. It was rectangular. It was the color of a sky that cannot decide whether to rain. It had presence. This is the word that residents, independently and over the decades, kept using when asked to describe their relationship to the building. Not atmosphere, not character, not charm. Presence. The word that implies an awareness on the part of the thing being described. The word that suggests the building was not simply there but that it knew it was there. That it attended to its own existence with something that, in a living thing, you might have called intention. I moved into apartment 4C at Arbor Court in January of the year this account begins. I was 34, recently separated from a 5-year relationship, in the process of renegotiating the terms of a life that had been organized around someone else for long enough that I had largely forgotten how it felt to be organized around myself. The apartment was affordable. The location was convenient to my work. The building had recently passed its most recent structural inspection and showed, on paper, no deficiencies. What the inspection did not measure, could not measure, was the presence. I felt it the first time I walked the corridor on the 4th floor. Not fear. Not unease. Something more neutral than either, more fundamental. The feeling of a space that was paying attention. I thought. Old building. Old buildings have this quality. It is the accumulated weight of the years, the echo of all the people who have moved through this corridor before me, the specific resonance of a place that has been lived in continuously for 6 decades. I signed the lease. I unpacked my boxes. And I did not think about the corridor again for 3 weeks. Until the morning I walked out of my apartment at 7:45 am and noticed, at the far end of the hallway, a door that had not been there the evening before. Chapter 2. The layout of the 4th floor. Before I describe the door, I want to describe the corridor. Because the corridor is important, and because the specific geometry of the 4th floor is relevant to understanding why the door's appearance was not, could not have been, something I had simply overlooked. The 4th floor of Arbor Court was arranged as follows. The elevator opened onto a central landing area, roughly square, with a fire extinguisher mounted on the left wall and a notice board on the right that residents used for the posting of notices about parking, lost cats, building maintenance schedules, and the occasional tersely worded complaint about noise. From this landing, the main corridor extended in both directions, east and west, each arm containing 11 apartment doors, 6 on one side and 5 on the other, numbered 4A through 4K going west and 4L through 4V going east. My apartment, 4C, was 3 doors west of the elevator landing on the left side of the western corridor, facing north. The western corridor terminated, at its far end, in a blank wall. Not a decorated wall, not a wall with a window, a plain, painted, institutional wall the color of old cream, unremarkable in every sense. I had walked past it dozens of times in my 3 weeks of residency. I had walked toward it and turned around at it and registered it as the end of the corridor with the thoroughness of someone registering a fact that requires no further attention. There was no door in that wall. There was no alcove where a door might be positioned. There was no frame, no hinges, no handle, no threshold. There was no evidence of a door having been removed or bricked over or otherwise previously present and subsequently altered. There was a wall, flat and seamless and terminating the corridor with the decisive finality of a wall that has always been a wall and intends to continue being one. On the morning of the 22nd day of my residency, that wall had a door in it. I walked the length of the corridor twice before I stopped at the far end and stood in front of it. The door was wooden. A panel door, the old-fashioned kind with two rectangular recessed panels above and two below. Painted the same cream color as the wall, which gave it a slightly vertiginous quality. The eye kept wanting to resolve it back into wall, kept losing the boundary between door and surround. But it was undeniably a door. It had a handle. A round brass knob, slightly tarnished, mounted on the right side of the door at the standard height. It had hinges on the left side, also brass. It had a keyhole below the knob, the old-fashioned kind that a skeleton key would fit. There was no light coming from beneath it. I stood in front of it for what felt like several minutes, but was probably 30 seconds. Then I turned around and went to work. I am, as I mentioned, a person who was trained as a journalist and retains the journalist's habits. One of those habits is the discipline of not drawing conclusions from insufficient evidence. The door was there. I had not previously observed it. Both of these facts were clear. What they added up to, whether I had missed it, whether it had appeared, whether the building had been modified overnight in some way I hadn't been informed of, these were questions I did not yet have sufficient evidence to answer. I went to work. I thought about the door all day. Chapter 3. Other residents. Arbor Court had, at the time of these events, 38 occupied apartments out of its 42. 4 were vacant, 1 on the 2nd floor, 2 on the 6th, 1 on the 7th. The occupied apartments contained an assortment of residents who, in the way of apartment dwellers in mid-sized cities, existed in a state of structured proximity and managed distance. We shared walls and ceilings and the elevator and the notice board and the laundry room in the basement, and we knew each other to varying degrees, from the fully anonymous, represented by a face glimpsed occasionally in the corridor and a name on a mailbox, to the properly acquainted, who spoke in the elevator and occasionally borrowed things and in 1 or 2 cases had developed something approaching friendship. The residents who are relevant to this account, and whom I will introduce in more detail as their roles become clearer, were as follows. On the 4th floor, directly across the hall from me in apartment 4D lived a woman named Elena Vasquez. She was in her early 50s, a retired school teacher who had lived in Arbor Court for 11 years and had, in that time, developed the particular authority of someone who knows a place thoroughly and is known by it in return. She was warm, observant, and possessed of a quality of attention that I had noticed and appreciated from our first conversation, the quality of someone who listens to the whole sentence before beginning to formulate a response. In apartment 4H toward the middle of the western corridor, lived a man named Paul Draper. All was 41, worked in insurance, and had the appearance and manner of someone who had, at some point, made peace with a moderate version of life and was quietly satisfied with the terms. He was pleasant in the corridor, unobtrusive in all the ways that matter in communal living, and had been in Arbor Court for 6 years. In apartment 4 at the far western end of the corridor, the end closest to the new door, one door away from the wall that had held the door, lived an elderly man named Mr. O.C. He had been in Arbor Court since the 1980s. He was 81 years old. He was, in the matter of the door, to become the most important person in this account. Chapter 4. The morning after. I came home from work that evening, walked the corridor, and looked at the door. It was still there. This was, in retrospect, the more significant fact. Not that it had appeared. Appearances can be mistaken for overlooked things, failures of prior attention. But that it had persisted. Was still there. Still cream-colored, still two-paneled over two, still with its brass knob and its brass hinges and its keyhole like a small dark eye. I stood in front of it for longer this time. I tried the handle. It did not turn. The door was locked. I knocked on it. 3 knocks, with my knuckle, the way you knock on a door behind which someone might be. No answer. No sound from the other side. No sense of presence, no creak of a floorboard, no shift of air beneath the gap at the bottom, which I now noticed was smaller than standard, perhaps half a centimeter, as if the door fit its frame with unusual precision. I straightened up and looked at the door for another moment. Then I went to Elena Vasquez's apartment and knocked. She answered promptly, as she tended to. She was a person who was usually in and who did not leave people standing in corridors. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "Come in." I came in, and I told her about the door. She went very still. Elena's apartment was the mirror image of mine, same layout, same dimensions, reversed. She had lived in it long enough to have made it fully her own. Books everywhere, a collection of small painted tiles from various countries arranged above the kitchen counter, plants in most of the windows. It was a room that said someone has been here and intends to keep being here, and I had always found it comfortable. She did not look comfortable now. "The end of the corridor," she said. "The west end." "Yes." "Where the wall is." She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't been down to that end today," she said. "I went the other way, the east corridor, the back stairs." "I didn't," she stopped. She looked at me carefully. "You're sure?" "I stood in front of it twice," I said. "I tried the handle." "It's locked." Another silence. "I want to see it," she said, and stood up. We walked the corridor together. I watched her face as we approached the far end. She saw it the way you see something you have been told to expect and find, despite the warning, surprising. The small adjustment of expression that happens when reality presents itself in the exact form described and is still, somehow, startling. She stood in front of the door for a long time. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. 11 years, she said. "And before today?" She shook her head. Not a gesture of uncertainty, a gesture of confirmation. "There was no door," she said. "I have walked this corridor 11 years. There was a wall." We stood in the corridor in silence. "I'm going to knock on 4, she said. Chapter 5 Mr. Ose apartment 4 was the last apartment on the western corridor before the Naudud wall. Its front door was perhaps 2 meters from the new door. If anyone on the 4th floor had heard or seen anything related to the door's appearance, it would be the occupant of 4A. Mr. Ose answered after a long pause, the pause of someone who moves carefully rather than quickly, who does not hurry but also does not make you wait longer than necessary. He was a small man, narrow-shouldered, with the kind of deliberate stillness that some elderly people develop, as if they have learned to conserve the energy of motion without losing the energy of presence. He wore a cardigan the color of autumn leaves and had reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was low and precise. "And the new resident." He looked at me with a quality of attention that I found immediately notable. Not the polite assessment of a neighbor meeting an acquaintance's companion. Something more direct. As if he had been expecting this meeting, if not this moment. "This is," Eleanor began. "I know who it is, Mr. Ose said. "I have seen you in the corridor. Please come in." We came in. His apartment was different from Eleanor's in every way except size. It was sparsely furnished, a few good pieces of furniture, nothing excessive, nothing ornamental except a row of framed photographs on the wall by the window. The photographs were old. Black and white, mostly. People and places I didn't recognize. He indicated chairs. We sat. "You have seen the door," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Have you?" "I became aware of it this morning," he said carefully. "I heard something in the night, not loud, nothing alarming. A sound like wood settling. Like a house in cold weather." He paused. "And in the morning I looked. Has this happened before?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Sit comfortably. This will take a little time to explain properly." Chapter 6 What Mr. Ose knew. Mr. Ose had been a resident of Arbor Court since 1987. He had moved in as a middle-aged man. He was 47 at the time, with his wife, Adwoa, who had died in 2009. He had remained in the apartment after her death because, as he said without self-pity, it was where she had lived, and the fact of the place containing her still, in the way places contain the people who have been in them, in the specific resonance of the walls and the light and the arrangement of the rooms, was more important to him than the practical considerations that might have argued for something smaller. He had, in 36 years in the building, observed Arbor Court in all its variations. He had seen residents come and go, had known, he said, every person who had lived on the 4th floor since his arrival. He had known the building in all its moods, its seasonal changes, its small mechanical failures and recoveries. And he had seen the door before. Not this specific manifestation, not precisely this location, this appearance. But the phenomenon. Twice in 36 years. The first time, he said, was in 1994. It appeared on the 3rd floor. The east corridor, the far end. A door in the wall where no door had been. It stayed for 11 days and then was gone. What happened during those 11 days? Eleanor asked. Nothing, Mr. Ose said. That was what was remarkable. The door appeared, and it was there, and then it was gone. The residents of the third floor observed it. Some tried to open it, it was always locked. One man, a young man who has long since moved away, claimed to have heard sounds through it. Music, he said. Old music, the kind from before his time. No one else heard anything. And the second time? I asked. 2006, he said. Second floor. Western corridor. A different configuration, the door appeared not at the end of the corridor but midway, between apartment 2F and 2G where there was no space for a room of any size. It stayed for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, 2 things happened. He paused. The woman in 2F, a woman I will call Mrs. K, began to have dreams. Vivid dreams, she said, more real than waking. She told me about them. In the dreams, she was inside a room she had never seen before, and the room was full of objects that did not belong to her, that she did not recognize, that she nonetheless felt, in the way of dreams, were profoundly familiar. What was the second thing? I asked. A man on the second floor, in apartment 2J disappeared, Mr. Ose said. He was there one evening. He was not there the following morning. His apartment was undisturbed. His belongings were intact. He was simply gone. He was found 3 days later in a town 70 miles away, with no memory of how he had come to be there and no clear account of the intervening days. He let this sit for a moment. He moved away shortly after, he said. He did not speak about it publicly. But I spoke with him before he left. And what he told me is something I have carried for 17 years. What did he tell you? Elena asked. Mr. Ose looked at his hands for a moment. He told me he had opened the door. Chapter 7. The building's history. The following morning, the third day of the door's presence, I went to the building's management company and asked to see what records they had on Arbor Court's construction and history. The management company occupied a small office 2 streets away and was run by a man named Harrigan who had managed the building for 12 years without, apparently, developing any particular feeling about it beyond the administrative. He looked at me with the mild suspicion that property managers extend to residents who ask for records, and asked what specifically I was looking for. I said, structural plans. Original architectural drawings if available. Any records of modifications to the building's internal layout. He provided what he had. A set of photocopied plans, somewhat deteriorated, from the original 1961 construction. A maintenance log going back to 1988. A series of inspection reports, the most recent 2 years old. I took these home and spent an evening with them. The original plans confirmed what I already knew from observation. The 4th floor's western corridor terminated in a load-bearing wall. The wall was structural. It was not, and had never been, designed to contain a door. On the other side of the wall, according to the plans, was exterior space, specifically, a section of the building's outer wall that faced the narrow gap between Arbor Court and the adjacent building, a gap of approximately 3 feet filled with the pipes and cables and accumulated debris of 60 years. No room. No space. No possible destination for a door in that wall. I looked at the maintenance log. In 1994, the year of Mr. Jose's first incident there was a brief entry. Reported anomaly, floor 3 west corridor, investigated, no structural issue found. In 2006, the second incident, a similar entry. Resident reports, floor 2, investigated by maintenance, no action required. 2 lines. 2 sentences. The documentation of 2 events that had apparently involved the appearance of a door in a wall, reduced to the blandest possible bureaucratic notation. I wondered about the person who had written those entries. Whether they had stood in front of the door as I had, tried the handle as I had, heard nothing on the other side as I had, and returned to their office and typed no action required. I wondered what they had decided not to write. I also, on that third day, began to ask other residents. Not systematically, not with any announcement or organized effort. I was not ready to make this a building-wide conversation. But I mentioned the door in the corridor to the 3 or 4 residents I encountered that day, watching their faces carefully. 2 of them had not noticed it and reacted with the slightly uneasy curiosity of people being told something they would prefer not to have to think about. 1, a young woman on the 4th floor, apartment 4N, who introduced herself as Suki, had noticed it and had been, it was clear from her expression, waiting for someone else to notice it too. I walked past it yesterday morning, and I stopped, and I looked at it for a long time, she said. And then I thought, I'm seeing things. New building, tired, seeing things. She paused. You're saying it's really there? It's really there, I said. She looked simultaneously relieved and more alarmed. Have you tried the handle? She asked. Locked, I said. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. And then, after a moment, should we be worried? I thought about what Mr. Ose had told us about 1994 and 2006. About the man who had opened the door. I don't know yet, I said. Chapter 8. All Draper's Theory. All Draper, in apartment 4H, had also noticed the door, and had a theory about it. I encountered him in the corridor on the afternoon of the 3rd day, on his way to the elevator with a bag of recycling. He stopped when he saw me looking toward the far end of the hallway. You've seen it too, he said. I have. Have you asked Harrigan's office about it? I called this morning, Paul said. They gave me the same line they give you for everything, they'd look into it. Which means nothing. I agreed that it meant nothing. My theory, Paul said, settling his recycling bag against the wall with the air of someone preparing for a conversation of some length, is that there's been an error somewhere. Some kind of administrative confusion. Maybe this floor is being subdivided. Maybe someone is converting a storage space or a utility area into a habitable unit, and there's a door in a wall that is about to become the entrance to a new apartment, and nobody thought to tell us. He paused. It would explain the door without needing to explain anything else. What about the fact that there's nothing on the other side of that wall? I said. I looked at the original plans. That's exterior space. He considered this. Plans can be wrong, he said. Or outdated. Maybe there's been a structural modification since 1961 that created a usable space. It was a reasonable objection, and I noted it. But I had also walked to the far end of the building's exterior that morning and looked at the outer wall, and the outer wall was blank, no windows, no evidence of recent construction, no sign of the kind of work that would create a livable space in what had previously been gap. I did not say this to Paul. He was offering himself a workable explanation, and I did not feel it was my place to take it from him. Maybe you are right, I said. He seemed pleased by this. He picked up his recycling and continued to the elevator. I walked to the end of the corridor and stood in front of the door. Day 3. Still there. Still cream-colored, still locked, still silent. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Or almost nothing. The suggestion of temperature, the wood was slightly cooler against my ear than the ambient temperature of the corridor, as if the space behind it was colder than the building. Or as if it had been standing in a different kind of air for longer than 3 days. I straightened up. I went back to my apartment. I did not sleep well that night. Chapter 9. The building begins to talk. By the end of the first week, most of the 4th floor knew about the door. This had not been the result of any organized disclosure. It had spread through the natural channels of communal living, through corridor conversations and shared elevator rides, and the kind of spontaneous neighborly contact that apartment buildings generate when something unusual is happening. People had seen the door, or been told about it, and had gone to look for themselves, and had found it, and had been unsettled in the specific and largely private way that inexplicable things unsettle people, not with screaming or obvious fear, but with a persistent low-level disturbance of the mental furniture. The 4th floor was not a floor of people who knew each other particularly well. As I described, the relationships ranged from friendly acquaintance to near anonymity. But the door had changed the social texture, in the way that shared unusual experiences tend to. It had given people something to talk about that was not the usual small talk of building maintenance and parking disputes, and this common subject had, almost despite itself, drawn people into slightly closer proximity than they had previously occupied. I became, somewhat by default, a focal point for this. Perhaps because I had been the first to articulate the strangeness clearly, or because Elena had mentioned that I had brought it to her attention, or simply because people who are new to a building and have a background in journalism carry about them some quality of active inquiry that invites disclosure. Whatever the reason, by the end of the first week, several residents had come to me with their observations. I will describe some of them here. From Suki, apartment 4N. Suki was 28, worked in graphic design, and had moved to Arbor Court 8 months earlier. She was not, she told me, a person who frightened easily. She had grown up in a household where unusual things were discussed matter-of-factly, where her grandmother's stories of spirits and presences were treated as one category of experience among others, neither more nor less real than the everyday. What troubles me about the door, she said, is not the door itself. It's the corridor. What about it? The corridor feels different now, she said. It's been feeling different for the past week. Not since the door appeared before. Maybe 3 or 4 days before. Like the corridor had been gathering something. Building toward something. She paused. Like the door was already there before it was visible. I wrote this down and said nothing. Does that sound crazy? She asked. It sounds accurate, I said. From an older man in apartment 4G whose name I will give as Mr. Feldman. Mr. Feldman was 73 and had been in Arbor Court for 9 years. He was a private man, not given to conversation, but he knocked on my door on the 4th day with the look of someone who had been deciding whether to knock for some time and had finally tipped toward yes. What he told me was simple. He had been hearing sounds at night from the direction of the far end of the corridor. Not through his apartment walls, through the corridor itself, through the front door of his apartment, which faced the corridor. A sound he described as low and rhythmic. Like breathing, he said, and then looked uncomfortable at having said it, as if the word revealed more than he intended. Is it every night? I asked. The last 3 nights, he said. Starting around 2 am. It stops before dawn. I asked whether he had gone into the corridor to investigate. He looked at me steadily. No, he said. I understood. From a young couple in apartment 4J who I will call the Changs. The Changs were in their early 30s, both working in healthcare, and had been in the building for 2 years. They had noticed the door on day 1 but had decided, they said, to treat it as a maintenance issue until told otherwise. They were practical people, they explained, and there was a quality in their manner, the careful practicality of people whose work involves confronting difficult realities, that I respected. What they told me was not about the door itself but about their daughter. They had a daughter, 4 years old, named May. May had been, in the days since the door's appearance, asking about the other door. She had seen it in the corridor, they had taken her past it on the way to the elevator, and had referred to it repeatedly and with what they described as a specific fixity of attention that they found unusual in a child for whom most new things produced interest but not this quality of sustained return. She keeps asking who lives there, the mother said. We say we don't know. She says she knows. We ask who. She says she stopped and looked at her husband. He said it. She says the one who came before. The one who came before. I wrote this down. I asked whether they had noticed anything else unusual. They looked at each other. May has been sleeping better than she has in months, the mother said. Normally she's up at least once in the night. Since the door appeared, she sleeps straight through. A pause. She says the door is why. Chapter 10. Elena's research. Elena had, in parallel with my conversations with other residents, been doing her own investigation. She had lived in the building for 11 years and had developed, in that time, the kind of knowledge that comes from genuine long-term habitation, not the knowledge of plans or records, but the knowledge of observation, of pattern, of attention paid without a specific purpose and therefore without the filtering that purposeful attention applies. She came to my apartment on the evening of the 5th day with a folder. The folder contained photocopies of letters, correspondence between a previous building manager and the management company's head office, dating from 1994 and 2006 respectively. She had found them in the building's administrative archive, a filing cabinet in the maintenance room that Harrigan's company had apparently inherited and never fully reviewed. The 1994 letter read, in part, residents of the 3rd floor have reported the presence of an unauthorized structural feature in the western corridor. This feature has been inspected by maintenance and found to have no identifiable cause. The feature in question is a door in the terminal wall of the western corridor. The door is locked and appears solid. No key in building possession fits the lock. The feature has been present for 6 days as of this writing. Residents are unsettled. I am requesting guidance on how to proceed, specifically regarding whether to inform residents officially of the situation or to continue the current approach of individual response to individual inquiries. The response from head office, clipped to the letter. Continue individual response approach. Maintain the position that the feature is under investigation. Do not comment officially on its nature or origin. If the feature resolves, log it and file. If it persists beyond 30 days, escalate for structural review. The feature had resolved. Mr. Ose had said 11 days. The 2006 correspondence was more extensive and notably more anxious in tone. The building manager at that time, a different person, had written multiple letters over the course of the 3 weeks the door had been present, each one more urgent than the last. The disappearance of the man in apartment 2J occupied significant portions of the later letters, framed carefully in language that suggested the writer was aware of the implausibility of what they were documenting. I am aware that what I am reporting may be difficult to credit, but I must note that the resident's temporary disappearance and the presence of the anomalous door occurred in the same time period and on the same floor. I do not assert a causal connection, but I believe this coincidence should be on record. The response. Thank you for your continued detailed reports. The coincidence of events you note has been logged. We are confident that a structural explanation will be found. Please continue to monitor. There was no further correspondence in the folder. The door had gone. The man had returned, confused and amnesiac. No structural explanation had been found or, apparently, seriously sought. Elena set the folder on my table and looked at me. They knew, she said. Both times. The management knew something was happening and chose the smallest possible response. To protect themselves from having to explain it, I said. Or because they genuinely didn't know what to do, she said. Which might be worse. Chapter 11. What Mr. Ose had been told. I went back to Mr. Ose on the 6th day. Not with Elena this time, alone. I had been thinking about what he had said in our first meeting. That the man from 2J had told him something before moving away. Something he had been carrying for 17 years. I asked him to tell me. He was quiet for a moment. We were in his apartment again, in the same arrangement as before, him in the chair by the window, me across from him. The light was the grey light of a January afternoon, thin and flat, making everything look slightly less solid than it was. His name was Daniel, Mr. Ose said. He was 40 years old. He worked in architecture. I always thought that was relevant, that he had a professional relationship to built space, to the way structures define what is possible and what isn't. He paused. He came to me 3 days before he moved out. He sat where you are sitting. He told me what he had done. He had opened the door, I said. He had found a way to open the door, Mr. Ose said. He didn't say how. He said only that it had taken him 2 weeks to find the way, that the lock was not a conventional lock, and that what unlocked it was not a key in any ordinary sense. What did he mean by that? He was not clear, Mr. Ose said. Or he was clear, but in terms I found difficult to follow. He said something about the door only opening for a certain kind of attention. That it required, he used the word, a resonance. between the person seeking entry and whatever was on the other side. A pause. He said it was not unlike the way a radio finds a frequency. That you don't force the frequency, you adjust yourself to it. I sat with this. What did he find when he opened it? I asked. Mr. Ose looked at the framed photographs on the wall. I followed his gaze. The black and white images, people, places, an era I had not lived in. He described a corridor, he said finally. Another corridor. He said it was like the corridor on the second floor, the same dimensions, the same layout but different in quality. He said the light was different. Not darker, he said, not darker, exactly, but older. As if the light had been there for a very long time and had developed a particular character. Was there anyone in the corridor? He said there were doors, Mr. Ose said. Many doors, he said. On both sides. Like the corridor of the building, but with more doors than the building has rooms. More doors than were possible given the space. He paused. And behind some of them, he said, he heard things. What kinds of things? Voices, he said. He described them as voices in the way that sound is sometimes heard through the walls of old buildings, muffled, tonally present but not linguistically distinct. You can hear that someone is speaking without hearing what they say. Another pause. But he said that after a time, the longer he stood in the corridor, the more the voices clarified. As if his ear was adjusting. As if he was tuning. And did they clarify? He said one did, Mr. Ose said. One voice, behind one door, became clear enough that he could hear individual words. He stopped. What did it say? I asked. Mr. Ose looked at me directly. It said his name, he said. It said his name, and then it said, "You are early." Chapter 12. The third day without sleep. I want to describe, at this point, the interior experience of the first week of the door's presence. Not the events, I have described those. The texture. The door, by the end of the first week, had become a constant background presence in my awareness. Not a frightening presence, or not primarily frightening. More like a question that had installed itself in a prominent place in my cognitive architecture and could not be displaced by the ordinary business of living. I would be making coffee or answering emails or walking to the corner shop and find that some portion of my attention had detached and gone back to the corridor and the door at the end of it. This split attention had a specific quality. It was not distraction, I was not less present in what I was doing. It was more like having a second screen running. A parallel process, running alongside the primary experience of the day, dedicated entirely to the question of the door. I had been through something similar before, in my journalistic work, on specific stories that had the quality of not letting go that persisted as active inquiries even when you weren't actively working them. But this was different in degree. More persistent. Less manageable. I think it was the proximity. The door was 20 meters from where I slept. Whatever it was present in my building, on my floor, at the end of my corridor. Its existence was a fact of my immediate environment in a way that a story I was working on never quite was. I could close a file. I could not close the corridor. The nights were the hardest. Not because of anything that happened, Nothing dramatic happened during those nights, at least in the early weeks. But because in the absence of the day's noise and activity, the awareness of the door had nothing to compete with. It occupied the quiet. I lay in bed on the third night and thought about what Mr. Ose had said about Daniel and the corridor beyond the door and the voice that had said his name and told him he was early. Early for what? I lay there for a long time. At some point after 2 a.m., I heard what Mr. Feldman had described. A low, rhythmic sound from the direction of the corridor. Audible through my front door. Not loud, not alarming in any conventional sense. The kind of sound you might dismiss as the building's mechanical systems, as pipes settling, as the 100 unnamed sounds that old buildings make in the night. But it had the quality that Mr. Feldman had given it. Breathing. Not human breathing. Not the specific rhythm of a person. The rhythm of something larger. Something that breathed more slowly. Something whose inhalation and exhalation described a longer, more patient arc. I lay still and listened to it until it stopped. It stopped at 4:17 a.m. I know the time because I looked at my phone when the silence returned, and the silence had a different quality from the usual silence, as if the sound had been holding something in place, and its cessation had released it. I did not sleep after that. Chapter 13. Suki's Photographs. On the 7th day, Suki knocked on my door with her phone. I took photographs, she said. I want to show you something. She had been photographing the door daily since its appearance, not out of any organized research impulse, she said, but because photographing things was how she processed them. It was a visual processing habit, a way of making the seen thing more concrete, more available for examination. She showed me the photographs in sequence. Day 1 through day 4. The door as I had seen it. Cream-colored, panel construction, brass fittings. The corridor behind the viewer in the reflection of the brass knob, Suki's face, the corridor stretching away, the fluorescent light in the ceiling. Day 5. The photograph looked the same. But Suki pointed to the gap at the bottom of the door. Do you see it? She said. I looked closely at the screen. The gap at the bottom of the door, the half-centimeter gap I had noticed on the first day, had something in it. Not light. Something darker than the corridor floor, extending under the gap by perhaps 2 millimeters. As if something on the other side of the door was pressing against the threshold. Is that a shadow? I asked. It's on the wrong side, she said. A shadow from the corridor would extend under the door from this side. This is extending from the other side. I looked at the day 6 photograph. The dark extension was further now, perhaps 4 or 5 millimeters under the door, more visible. Day 7, today's photograph, taken an hour ago. I stared at the screen. The dark extension filled the entire gap. Edge to edge, the threshold was occupied by something that was pressing through from the other side. It looked like the edge of a very dark fabric, or the tip of a shadow that had been folding itself progressively forward, or, and this was the image that I could not quite dismiss, the edge of something that was trying to cross a threshold it had not yet been permitted to cross. I'm going to take another one tomorrow, Suki said. Yes, I said. Do that. Chapter 14. The building at night. It was Eleanor who first articulated what I had been feeling but not yet said. We were in the corridor on the 8th evening, not at the far end, not near the door. We had met by chance, both returning from errands, and had stopped to talk in the way that the situation had made natural. The corridor was quiet. The other residents were behind their doors. The building is different, she said. Different how? She considered. Attentive, she said. Like a building that is paying attention to something. To the door. Or to what's behind it, she said. Or to us. She paused. Have you noticed the elevator? I had. The elevator, which had previously been reliable in the unremarkable way of functioning equipment, had begun to behave oddly in the past few days. Not breaking down, nothing mechanical had failed. But it was arriving on floors before being called. Doors opening on the 4th floor when no one had summoned it. Not frequently, once or twice a day. Enough to notice. I got in it this morning, Elena said, and it went to the 6th floor before the lobby. I hadn't pressed 6. I hadn't pressed anything. It just went up first. Did anything happen on the 6th floor? The doors opened. The corridor was empty. They closed again. And then it went to the lobby. She paused. I have been telling myself it's a malfunction. It might be, I said. It might be, she agreed. But it doesn't feel like a malfunction. It feels deliberate. We stood in the corridor for a moment in the particular silence of two people who are thinking the same thing and both slightly reluctant to say it first. Something in the building is active, I said. Yes, she said. That is what it feels like. Chapter 15. The Management Company's Response. On the 9th day, Harrigan himself came to the building. I had made a second, more specific request the day before, not for records this time but for an in-person meeting to discuss the door. I had been prepared for delay, for dismissal, for the same non-response that the 1994 and 2006 letters had received. What I was not prepared for was Harrigan arriving at 9 am with a face that suggested he had been expecting this call. We met in the lobby. He was a compact man in his 50s, carefully dressed, with the manner of someone who has spent a career managing things he would prefer not to think about. He had seen the door before I could show it to him. He had walked the 4th floor corridor before coming down to the lobby. I've been the manager of this building for 12 years, he said. In that time, this has not happened. A pause. But I know about the previous incidents. From the archive, I said. From the handover, he said. When I took over the management contract, the previous manager, he retired in 2010, he Saturday me down and told me about this building. Not officially. Informally. He said Arbor Court was a building that occasionally did things. He said the things were not dangerous. In his experience, no resident had been harmed. He said the best approach was to document carefully, keep residents as calm as possible, and wait for it to pass. And the man from 2006? I said. The one who disappeared for 3 days. Harrigan was quiet for a moment. He was told to describe that as a mental health episode, he said. The company's position was, and I want to be clear that I'm telling you this because I think you've earned transparency, not because I'm comfortable with it. The company's position was that the alternative explanation would be uninsurable. I looked at him. Uninsurable, I said. A building whose corridor doors occasionally open onto other dimensions, he said, with a flatness that suggested he had rehearsed the phrase, is not something any insurance company in existence has a policy for. We went up to the 4th floor together. He stood in front of the door for a long time, and I watched his face. It was the face of a man who had been told about something, and who was now seeing it and finding the seeing worse than the telling. He tried the handle. Locked. He looked at the gap at the bottom. I watched his face change when he saw what was there, or what was pressing through. How long has it been like this? He asked. Since day 5, I said. It's been increasing. He straightened up. The previous manager said that in both prior cases, the door resolved without intervention, he said. He said the building seemed to, he used the word complete something. That the door's appearance was the beginning of a process, and that the process concluded on its own timeline. 11 days in 1994, I said. 21 days in 2006. He looked at me. You've done your research. What about the man in 2006? Was his disappearance part of the process completing? A long pause. The previous manager's view, Harrigan said carefully, was that the man's experience accelerated the process. That what happened to him was, he used the word catalytic. That the door closed sooner than it otherwise might have because of what he did. Because he opened it, I said. Harrigan looked at me sharply. You know about that, Mr. Ose told me. Harrigan was quiet for a long moment, looking at the door. I'm going to be very honest with you, he said at last. I don't know what this is. I don't think anyone does. What I can tell you is that the building's history suggests it is not dangerous if left alone. I am asking all the residents of this floor to leave it alone. And if someone doesn't? I said. He looked at me for another moment. Then he walked back toward the elevator. Log everything, he said. The same advice as 1994 and 2006. Log everything. Chapter 16. Conversations in the dark. The community that had formed around the door, loose, informal, united by shared proximity to something inexplicable, had developed its own rhythms by the middle of the second week. People gathered in the corridor in the evenings. Not formally, not by appointment, but there was a gravitational pull toward the far end of the corridor, toward the door, that produced a recurring congregation of 3 or 4 or 5 residents standing at a conversational distance from the door, talking about it. About what it was. About what to do. About what Harrigan had said, which had been shared among the floor with the speed of shared space. I want to record some of these conversations, because they are part of the texture of the experience and because the things people said, in those corridor gatherings in the evenings of the second week, were often more searching and more honest than what was said in my more formal one-on-one interviews. One evening, Paul Draper said, I've given up on the maintenance error theory. I spent 2 days on that theory and I've given it up. He looked at the door. I need a new theory. Suki said. What if it doesn't require a theory? What if it just requires attention? Attention to what? All said. To the fact of it, Suki said. To what it is, whatever it is, without immediately needing it to be something we already have a category for. This was a version of what Elena had said to me earlier, The difference between confusion and mystery. I was beginning to think it was important. Another evening, the Changs were in the corridor, without me. The mother said. She asked this morning if she could go in. We said no. She said. But it's for me. Everyone was quiet. What did she mean by that? All asked. We don't know, the mother said. We asked her. She said the one who came before was waiting for her. She paused. I know how that sounds. She's 4. 4-year-olds say things. Yes, Elena said. But they also sometimes say things. Mr. Ose, who had joined the corridor gatherings on the third evening and had been present most evenings since, said nothing on this occasion. He was looking at the door with an expression. I had noticed him wearing, an expression of recognition, of someone watching something they have been expecting unfold according to a pattern they know but cannot fully explain. I asked him later, in private, what he was thinking in those moments. I am thinking, he said, about the photographs on my wall. I waited. My wife, Adwoa, had a photograph in her family. It was taken in Ghana, in the city where she was born, in the 1930s. It showed a street, a row of houses, and at the end of the street, a door. Just a door, standing in the open air. No frame, no wall, no house attached to it. Just a door. The story in her family was that it had appeared one morning and stood there for several weeks and then was gone. He paused. I used to think it was a story. The kind of story that grows around an old photograph until the story and the photograph can no longer be separated. Now I am less certain. Chapter 17. Day 12. On the 12th day, 3 things happened. The first. Suki's photograph showed the dark extension fully across the threshold and, for the first time, beginning to rise up the door itself. A thin darkness at the base of the door, perhaps 2 centimeters high, as if whatever was pressing from the other side had found a way to spread beyond the gap and was now working its way slowly up the surface of the wood. The second, Mr. Feldman reported that the breathing from the corridor had changed. Not in rhythm, the rhythm was the same, slow and patient. But in quality. He said it had developed a tone. Not music, exactly, not a melody or a harmony. A tone in the way that certain sounds have, the way a very large bell has a fundamental note that it sustains after the strike. A single, very low tone that underlay the rhythm. Felt, he said, as much as heard. In the chest, in the sternum, in the place where very low frequencies register not as sound but as vibration. The third thing, Mr. Ose came to my door at 10 p.m., which he had not done before. He was an early-to-bed man, not typically in circulation at that hour. He looked, when I opened the door, like a man who had made a decision. He said, I think it is time I told you what I know about this building. What I have known for a long time, and have not told anyone. Not because I was hiding it, because I had no one to tell it to who would understand why it mattered. I let him in. He sat in the chair by my window. He said, Arbor Court was built on the site of something older. Chapter 18. What was here before? The site on which Arbor Court stood had, according to Mr. Ose's account, a history that predated the 1961 construction by a considerable margin. Before the apartment building, There had been a Victorian terrace, a row of 12 houses, built in the 1870s, demolished in the post-war clearances of the late 1950s as part of the urban redevelopment programs of that era. Standard enough, this was the fate of a great deal of Victorian housing stock in mid-sized English cities during that period. Before the Victorian terrace, the site had been a large private house. A Georgian residence built in the 1740s set back from the road, with grounds that extended to the east and west. This house had been in the possession of one family for nearly a century before being subdivided into rental accommodation in the 1840s and eventually demolished to make way for the terrace. Mr. Ose knew this because he had spent years researching it. Not as a professional historian, he had been an engineer in his working life, but as a private pursuit, driven by something he described as a felt need to understand the ground under his feet. When he had moved into Arbor Court in 1987 and noticed, almost immediately, what he called the building's quality, he had begun to ask what the building was built on top of. What it had inherited from what preceded it. The Victorian terrace he had found easily in the historical records. The Georgian house had taken longer, but the records existed. Deeds, surveys, the occasional reference in letters and diaries of the period. What had taken him years to find, and what he had found only partially, was what had been on the site before the Georgian house. Before 1740, he said, the records become sparse, as they always do. The site appears in a survey from 1698 as a field of uncertain purpose adjacent to the old lane. That phrase, uncertain purpose, appears again in a document from 1712. And then, in a letter written in 1739 by the architect of the Georgian house to his patron, there is a paragraph that I have read many times. He had the letter. Or rather, he had a transcription of it. The original was in an archive he had consulted years earlier. He had brought the transcription with him. He read it aloud. The site presents certain difficulties, which I have endeavored to address in the disposition of the foundations. There is in the eastern portion of the ground a feature which the local persons describe variously as a crossing place, a thin spot, and in the older accounts simply as a door. This feature I take to be a superstition of long standing, but have nevertheless instructed my workmen to avoid disturbing the earth in that quarter. The structure will be positioned so as to encompass the eastern portion within its plan, as my patron desires, but the foundations in that quarter will be laid without excavation below the existing grade. Whether this accommodation of local belief is necessary I cannot say. But it costs nothing and may prevent misunderstanding with the workforce. Mr. Ose set the transcription down. A crossing place, he said. A thin spot. A door. These are the things the local people called it, I said. In 1739. And before 1739, he said, for as long before as there had been local people to name it. I looked at the transcription. At the phrase the architect had used, in 1739, as if it were a well-established local designation with a long history behind it. A door. Not a site. Not a feature. A door. Chapter 19. The pattern. Over the following days, as I absorbed what Mr. Ose had told me, I worked on mapping the pattern. The incidents he had described, 1994 and 2006, and now the current one, 2024. 3 events in 30 years, which meant one every approximately 15 years. The architect's letter from 1739, in which the same phenomenon had been known to exist by multiple names suggesting long prior acquaintance. Whatever had happened in the Georgian house, or the Victorian terrace, or the centuries before any house stood there. A recurring aperture. A place in the building, which was itself on a place in the ground that opened, at intervals, onto something else. Something that existed alongside the building's ordinary interior without being of it. Something with its own corridor, its own doors, its own voices. I thought about the architect's phrase. A thin spot. The places in the world where the membrane is thinner than usual. Where what is here and what is adjacent are closer than they are elsewhere. Where the boundary is not fully sealed. I also thought about the regularity of the interval. 15 years, approximately. Not precise, not mechanical, but consistent enough to suggest a rhythm. As if the thinning and the door were not random events, but part of a cycle. As if the thing on the other side of the door breathed, and its breathing had a period of approximately 15 years. Mr. Feldman's Nights of Sound. The slow rhythm. The underlying tone. I thought, what if that is it breathing? What if the sound that comes at 2 am and stops at 4 is the breath of something that opens the door every 15 years, slowly inhaling and exhaling across a threshold that the building, and the ground under the building, and the long history of names for what the ground contained, had been marking since before memory? This was a thought I could not quite dismiss, and could not quite embrace. It sat in the same register as Mr. Ose's transcription, the architect's careful letter, his pragmatic accommodation of the local belief, his phrase. Costs nothing and may prevent misunderstanding. The architect had built around it. Had not excavated. Had made space for it in his plan. I thought about what it meant to make space for something you didn't understand. To acknowledge it without claiming to know it. To build your house around it rather than through it. Chapter 20. Elena's Dreams. Elena came to me on the 14th morning. She had always been, in this matter as in others, direct and precise, a woman who reported her experiences accurately and without embellishment. What she told me that morning was therefore more significant for its delivery than for the content, which might have seemed less remarkable from someone with a different character. Elena reporting a dream meant the dream was worth reporting. She had dreamed, she said, of the corridor. Not the 4th floor corridor of Arbor Court, another corridor. The corridor that Daniel had described to Mr. Ose. The one on the other side of the door. The same dimensions, the same layout, the older light. In the dream she had been standing in this corridor, and the doors on either side of her were closed, and she had been aware of an absence of something she had expected to find and had not. She could not say what the expected thing was, only that its absence had a specific shape, a particular quality of gap. And then, she said, someone had spoken to her. Not from behind a door. From the air of the corridor itself, as if the corridor had a voice. It had said, "You are looking for the wrong thing." She had said, in the dream, "What should I be looking for?" It had said, "You are already carrying it." She had looked down at her hands. She had been holding something. She could not see what it was, not because it was invisible but because looking at it directly was somehow not the way to see it. It required peripheral vision. She had looked away from her hands, and out of the corner of her eye had seen, in her hands, a key. She had woken up. "I've thought about it all morning," she said. What kind of key it was. Whether it was literal. Whether the dream was telling me something about the lock. "What do you think?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said, "that the dream was telling me that I already have what I need to understand this. And that looking directly at what I need is the wrong method." She paused. "I think a lot of what happens in that building is like that," she said. "It requires peripheral vision." Chapter 21. The Child. On the 15th day, Ma Chang walked to the end of the corridor. Her parents had not given her permission. They had been in their apartment, and she had opened the front door and walked out in the way that small children sometimes act, with a directness and a lack of self-monitoring that adults find either charming or alarming depending on the context. Suki saw her first, coming out of her own apartment in the direction of the elevator and finding the small figure proceeding steadily down the corridor toward the far end. She called out gently, "Ma, where are you going?" Ma did not stop. She said, without turning around. "To the door." Suki followed her. By the time they reached the door, two other residents had come into the corridor, Mr. Feldman, drawn by the voices, and Mr. Ose, who had his door open and saw them pass. Ma stood in front of the door. She was smaller than the door by a significant margin. She came up to perhaps the level of the knob, and the door rose above her to the full height of the corridor. She stood very still, which was unusual for a 4-year-old, and looked at the door in the specific way she had been described as looking at it on earlier occasion. With the quality of sustained attention that in a child suggests not idle curiosity but something more fixed, more purposeful. She reached out and put her hand flat against the surface of the door. Everyone watching held still. Ma said, very clearly, "I know you're there." The corridor was silent. Then she said, "I'm not ready yet." She took her hand off the door. She turned around and walked back past the gathered residents to her apartment, opened the door, and went inside. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Mr. Ose said, in a tone I had never heard from him before, quite a little odd, but also somehow confirming, like a man watching a proof. "She is very young to know that." Chapter 22. What Ma said. The Changs were shaken. Not frightened, they were clear about this, both of them, but shaken in the specific way that a parent is shaken when their child does something that reveals an inner life more complex and more knowing than the parent had understood. The specific vertigo of realizing that the small person in your care is navigating a relationship with the world that you cannot fully see. They allowed me to speak with Ma that evening. She sat on the sofa between her parents, eating a biscuit, with the composed informality of a child who does not yet experience an adult asking her questions as something requiring particular performance. I asked her about the door. She said, "It's a waiting door." I asked what that meant. She said, "It's where things wait to come back." I asked, "Come back from where?" She looked at me with the direct assessment of a child who is deciding whether an adult is worth explaining something to. Apparently she decided yes. She said, "From being away for a while." I asked, "Do you know what's waiting behind it?" She thought about this for a moment, chewing her biscuit. Then she said, "Yes, But I'm not supposed to say yet. She smiled, the uncomplicated smile of a child who has remembered a rule and is not troubled by it. Because it's not time. Her mother asked. Not time for what? For it to be mine, Ma said. It's for when I'm bigger. Her father asked, very gently. What happens when you're bigger? She looked at the door of their apartment, the front door, through which the corridor waited, and at the end of the corridor the door. She said, I think I open it. Chapter 23. What the building knew. I want to spend some time here on the question of the building. Not on the door, on Arbor Court itself. On the question of whether a building can know something. Whether the accumulated presence of 60 years of human habitation, the specific texture of 42 apartments occupied in sequence by a shifting population of people who had lived their lives within its walls, produces something that might be called, if not intelligence, then memory. Something that holds what it has contained. This is not a mystical proposition. Or it is not only a mystical proposition. There are serious philosophical accounts of what places are, what it means to be a place, as opposed to merely being a location in space. Places, on these accounts, are constituted in part by the experiences that occur within them. They are not simply the physical structure, but the structure in relation to its history of human occupation. The building plus what has happened in the building. Arbor Court had been happening since 1961. 60 years of people. Their births and deaths and arguments and reconciliations and solitudes and companionships and meals and sleeplessness and all the rest of what constitutes a human life as it is actually lived. All of it had occurred within the same walls, across the same floors, in the same corridors, under the same roof. And underneath all of it, in the eastern portion of the plan, where the 1739 architect had instructed his workmen not to excavate. The crossing place. The thin spot. The door. I thought about what Mr. Ose had said about the building being attentive. I thought about what Elena had said. The feeling that the building was paying attention to something. I thought about the elevator arriving uninvited on the 6th floor, the doors opening onto an empty corridor, the doors closing, the descent. What if the building was not passive in relation to the door? What if 60 years of habitation, 60 years of people living above the crossing place, dreaming in the rooms above it, carrying their lives through the corridors and up the stairs and in and out of the elevator, had produced something in the building that engaged with whatever was on the other side? That the building and the door were in a relationship more active than simply occupying the same space. I thought about Mr. Feldman's description of the breathing as something felt in the chest, in the sternum. The register of very low frequencies. The building as a resonating body. The building breathing with whatever was breathing on the other side. Chapter 24. Night of the 17th day. On the 17th night, I woke at 2 am. Not from a dream or not from a dream I could recall. From alertness. The particular quality of wakefulness that is not the slow emergence from sleep but the sudden being awake, as if a switch had been thrown. The corridor sound was there. The breathing. Slightly louder than usual, or perhaps I was simply more receptive to it tonight, the 3 weeks of accumulated attunement having taken me to a threshold of sensitivity that I had not previously reached. And underneath it, the tone. The single, very low tone that Mr. Feldman had described, and that I had been aware of on previous nights, but had not been able to fully perceive. It was there now, clearly. A note so low it was more vibration than sound, present in the air of the room as a quality of pressure rather than as an auditory event. I lay still and listened. After some time, I did not look at my phone, did not want to break the quality of the moment with the ordinary data of a clock. The breathing changed. Not the rhythm. The rhythm was the same. The long slow inhalation, the longer pause, the exhalation. But the quality changed. The tone underneath it changed. The note shifted not dramatically, not to something unrelated, but along the same fundamental frequency, as if the source of the sound was adjusting itself. Tuning. The word from Mr. O's account of Daniel. Tuning. The door required a resonance between the person seeking entry and whatever was on the other side. I lay in the dark and thought about resonance. About the radio finding a frequency not by forcing itself to a setting but by adjusting. By becoming the thing the signal required. At some point, and I cannot say how much later, because time in that state does not have its ordinary granularity, the tone reached a quality I can only describe as adjacent. As if it had come as close as it could come from where it was, as if the remaining distance was now on my side. As if the adjustment I needed to make was available to me if I chose to make it. I did not make it. I lay very still and let the moment pass. The tone shifted back. The breathing continued. At 4:17 a.m., as before, it stopped. I lay awake until morning, thinking about what it would mean to adjust. To tune. To close the remaining distance. Chapter 25. Mr. O's wife. On the 18th day, Mr. O's told me about Advoa. He had not, until now, spoken about her in this context, in the context of the door, the building, the thin spot. He had mentioned her death, and the reason he had stayed in the apartment after it. But he had not said what he now said. She had known about the building before they moved in. She was from Ghana, he said. She had been raised in a tradition that did not separate the world of the living from the world of the dead as cleanly as the Western tradition tends to. She understood the world as permeable, as a place where the boundaries between categories that Europeans treat as absolute are, in her understanding, conditional. Flexible. He paused. When I brought her to see the apartment, before we moved in, to look at it, she walked the corridor and stopped at the far end and put her hand on the wall. The wall that is now the door. She stood there for a long time. What did she say? I asked. She said, "This is a good building to live in." He paused. I asked her why. She said, "Because it is honest. It does not pretend that this is all there is. It leaves a place for the other things." He was quiet for a moment. She visited the wall regularly, he said. Not every day. But she would walk to the end of the corridor when she went by. She would put her hand on it. Sometimes she would say something, very quietly. I never asked what. It seemed private. Did she ever say anything to you about what she thought was on the other side? He looked at the photographs on his wall. At the black and white images, the faces, the places. She said it was for the ones who were not finished, he said slowly. Her exact words, as I remember them. It is for the ones who have more to do and have not yet done it. The ones who came before us and are not yet ready to be completely gone. He paused. She believed the door was an accommodation. That the building or the ground or whatever was in the ground had left a place for them. The way you leave a candle in the window. A candle in the window. The umber glow of a lit room, visible from outside. The signal. Someone is here. Someone is home. Someone is waiting. When she died, I said, "Did you think she was?" I thought. He said quietly that she was exactly where she needed to be. And that when the door opens again, as it has now, she is among those who come close to it from the other side. He looked at me. I do not expect to hear her voice. I do not expect to open the door and find her. I am not a sentimental man about these things. But I think that she is part of whatever is there. Part of the accumulated presence of everyone who has lived and died on this ground since the ground was first given a name. He paused one last time. That is enough for me. That is actually a great deal. Chapter 26. The Decision. By the 19th day, a question had crystallized among the fourth-floor residents. What, if anything, should be done? The options, as they had emerged through the corridor conversations and the private discussions, were essentially three. The first. Nothing. Follow Harrigan's advice, and the advice of the previous building managers and the management company's 1994 head office. Document, wait, let the process complete on its own timeline. The building had done this before. The door had closed. Life had resumed. The second. Attempt to open the door. Follow the path that Daniel had taken in 2006, find the resonance, find the way, cross the threshold. Learn what was on the other side from the inside rather than from speculation and second-hand account. The third, which Elena had proposed, and which I had been thinking about since. Something in between. Not passivity and not entry. Engagement on the door's own terms. Paying attention in the way the building seemed to require, the way the tone seemed to require, the way every element of the experience seemed to suggest. Peripherally, without forcing, without demanding that the thing be on terms the observer could fully control. The third option had no model. There was no account of it having been tried before, not in Mr. Ose's experience, not in the archive letters, not in the historical record. The only precedents were people who had waited and watched the door close after a period, and one person who had opened it and spent 3 days inside and returned and left. What does the middle path look like, practically? Paul Draper asked, in the corridor on the 19th evening. I think, Elena said, that it looks like what we are already doing. Being here. Paying attention. Not looking away from it, not running toward it. Being present with it on its own terms, for as long as it needs. And if it's still here in a month? All said. Then we will have been present with it for a month, she said. And perhaps that will be what it needed. Suki said. I think the building is doing the same thing. Being present with it. The elevator, the sounds. The building is paying attention in the only ways a building can. Mr. Ose, from his position slightly to the side of the main group, said. My wife paid attention to it for 22 years. And I think she was right that it was a good building to live in because of it. Not despite it. We stood in the corridor for a moment longer, all of us, in the particular silence of a group of people who have not resolved something but who have, perhaps, arrived at a shared willingness to carry it without resolving it. Then we went to our respective apartments. And the building breathed around us in the dark. Chapter 27. The tone changes. On the 21st day, 3 weeks from the door's appearance, the tone changed. Not gradually, not as the incremental shift I had been aware of on previous nights. A distinct change, clearly audible even through the walls of my apartment, that happened at 2 a.m. precisely and that several residents on the floor reported hearing simultaneously. The tone moved up in frequency. Not dramatically, it was still very low, still in the register of physical vibration more than audible sound. But it had moved, definitively, from the frequency it had been inhabiting for 3 weeks to something higher, something that crossed more clearly into the range that the human ear processes as sound rather than as pressure. And it had become, I struggled with this word, but it was the accurate word, recognizable. Not as a melody. Not as anything musical in the conventional sense. But in the way that a voice is recognizable before you can hear the words. A quality of character, of individuality, that bypasses the analytical mind and lands directly in a more primary register of knowing. I know this sound, some part of me said, in the way that you sometimes know you know someone's handwriting before you can name the person. I lay still and listened for a long time. The breathing and the tone continued together, the tone now integrated with the rhythm, as if the sound and the breath were parts of the same thing, as if the breathing was the carrier and the tone was the signal being carried. It was, I thought, very close now. Whatever was on the other side of the door, whatever had been breathing across the thin spot for 3 weeks, was very close. Not in the physical sense of proximity, not about distance in space. In the sense of the distance between a signal and the receiver finding the signal's frequency. The gap between them had become very small. At 3 a.m., I got up. I dressed and went into the corridor. I was not alone. Elena was there, in her dressing gown, standing outside her apartment door. Mr. Ose was in his doorway. Suki was at her door, phone in hand. The Changs were in their doorway but not in the corridor, and they had, I noticed, positioned themselves so that their bodies blocked the door, so that May, if she woke, would not walk past them into the hall. We looked at each other. No one spoke. Then we all turned and looked toward the far end of the corridor. The door was different. The dark extension from the gap, which had, on day 17, reached the height of several centimeters on the door's surface, was gone. The gap was clean. The door was clean. The cream-painted surface was unchanged. But the door itself was glowing. Not brightly. Not with any visible light source. But with a quality of luminescence that I can only describe as a readiness, the way a screen glows in a dark room before anything is displayed on it, the potential of the illumination prior to the content. The door looked ready. Mr. Ose walked forward. He walked slowly, with his particular careful economy of motion, to the end of the corridor. He stood in front of the door. He put his hand flat against the surface. We watched him. He stood there for a long time. His hand on the door glowing its readiness, the tone in the corridor rising slightly, the breathing steady. Then he said, quietly, clearly, to the door. I know you are there. I know it has been a long time. I know you have been waiting. and I know I am not yet ready to come. But I hear you. I have always heard you. He paused. Thank you, he said. For all of it. For the years. For the building. For the ground. For the door that keeps coming back. He took his hand off the door. He turned and walked back toward his apartment, past each of us standing in our doorways. He looked at us as he passed. His face was calm in a way that I found extraordinary, the calm of someone who has said what needed to be said and has been heard. He went into his apartment and closed his door. We stood in the corridor for a moment. Then the glow faded. And the breathing, which I had been hearing at 2 a.m. for 3 weeks, gradually, gracefully, in a long slow exhalation, came to an end. Chapter 28. The morning of the 22nd day. I woke in the morning to silence. Not the absence of sound silence of an ordinary morning. A different quality of silence, the silence that follows something. The silence that has the shape of what preceded it pressed into it, the way a mold holds the shape of the thing that made it. I went to the corridor. The door was gone. Not abruptly gone, not as if it had been removed, leaving behind marks or damage or any sign of alteration. Gone in the sense of not being there, as cleanly and as completely as if it had never been. The wall at the end of the corridor was a wall again. Cream-colored, flat, seamless. The wall it had always been before. I stood at the end of the corridor and looked at the wall for a long time. Elena came out of her apartment. She stood beside me. We looked at the wall together. 22 days, she said. One more than 2006, I said. 11 days in 1994, 21 in 2006, 22 now. Each time slightly longer. She considered this. As if each time it needs a little more. Or as if each time there is a little more to say, I said. A little more on both sides that needs to be heard. Mr. Ose's door was still closed. I did not knock, it was early, and what he had done the previous night had the quality of something that required its own time of aftermath. But Suki came out of her apartment, and the three of us stood there, in the now ordinary corridor, at the now ordinary wall, in the quiet of a morning from which something had departed. Do you think it will come back? Suki asked. In 15 years, I said. More or less. And whoever lives here then will go through this. Yes. She looked at the wall. I hope they have someone like Mr. Ose, she said. I thought about what he had said to the door. About the years. About the building. About the ground. About the door that keeps coming back. About the thank you. Chapter 29. In the weeks after. The weeks after the door's departure had a quality similar to what I had read about the periods following major shared events. A combination of relief and a particular flatness that results from the withdrawal of sustained intensity. The corridor returned to its ordinary function of connecting apartments to the elevator. Residents exchanged the ordinary pleasantries of shared living. The building breathed with its mechanical systems rather than with something older and slower. But things were different. The people who had been through it, who had stood in the corridor on those evenings, who had heard the breathing through their walls, who had watched Mr. Ose address the door, were different in the way I have described before in this account and in the previous one. Not dramatically, not in ways visible from outside, but in the interior topology of their relationship to the world. Old Draper, who had spent the first week generating rational explanations, told me in the second week after the door's departure that he had stopped trying to explain certain things. Not everything, he said. Not important things, not things that require explanation to navigate. But some things, the things that resist explanation not because they're too complex but because explanation is the wrong tool, those I'm letting sit. Suki began photographing the wall. The blank wall at the end of the corridor. Not looking for anything, she was clear about this. Just maintaining a record. Just being present with the place. The Changs reported that May had asked once, after the door was gone. Where did it go? And when they said they didn't know, she had said. It went back to wait. And had seemed satisfied by this, and had not asked again. Elena had a long phone conversation with a friend who was a theologian, not about doctrine but about the experience of proximity to something that exceeded the available categories. She told me afterward that the conversation had been one of the most useful she could remember. And Mr. Ose was as he always was. Quite precise, present. He said, when I asked him how he was. I am well. I have been waiting to say that for 17 years. Since Daniel came and told me what was behind the door, and I understood what was there. He paused. I could not say it then. I did not have the right. Advoa had not been gone long enough, and I was still in the part of grief that is not ready for the other thing. What is the other thing? I asked. Gratitude, he said simply. For what we have. For the time. For the building. For the door that reminds us, every 15 years or so, that this is not all there is. He looked at me. That seems worth being grateful for. Chapter 30. What lives in old buildings? I want to return, in this extended section, to a question that the experience raised but that the account has not yet fully addressed. The question of what it is, specifically, that old buildings contain. Not in the supernatural sense, or not only in that sense. In the more everyday sense that I think is actually the foundation of the supernatural sense, the ground from which it grows. Old buildings contain time. This is not a metaphor. Or it is a metaphor, but it is also a description of something real. The materials of an old building have been in place for decades, for centuries. The wood, the stone, the brick, they have absorbed the variations of temperature and humidity and load and light through all the seasons of all the years they have been standing. They carry the physical record of that duration. Not as information in any retrievable sense, but as the specific quality of materials that have been through a great deal and have arrived at a particular condition as a result. Old buildings contain lives. Again, not metaphorically or not only. The surfaces of a room that people have lived in for decades carry the marks of that living. The paint on a wall holds the layers of every previous coat. The floors hold the tracks of people's habitual paths from door to kitchen to bedroom. The air of a room that has been occupied for a long time has a specific quality that is different from the air of a newly finished space. It is breath air. It is air that has been in the presence of people. And old buildings contain what those people carried. Their fears and their comforts and their relationships to the things they understood and the things they didn't. The 1739 architect accommodated the local belief in the crossing place. He did not need to believe in it himself to acknowledge its reality as something the people around him held as real. He made space for it. The building he designed contained the crossing place and the belief in the crossing place, and 60 years later the Victorian terrace contained it, and 60 years after that Arbor Court was built on top of all of it, and 60 years after that I moved in. And the crossing place, the thin spot, the door, was still there. Still doing what it had apparently always done. Opening, periodically, onto whatever is adjacent to the ordinary world. The corridor with its many doors, the voices behind them, the older light. Chapter 31. 3 other buildings. In the months after the door's departure, I began to look for other accounts. Other buildings. Other places where the same or similar things had been reported. I found them. Not easily, and not in forms that a conventional evidential standard would accept. The accounts lived in the margins, in local history archives, in the notebooks of amateur historians, in the private correspondence of people who had experienced something they could not explain and had written it down for reasons that were partly documentary and partly, I think, the simply human need to tell someone. But they were there. A terrace house in Bristol, early 20th century, where residents on the ground floor had repeatedly reported an additional room appearing at the end of the rear hallway. A room that was always empty, always cold, always gone within a week. A hotel in Edinburgh, Victorian, where staff reported a door on the 3rd floor that appeared occasionally and was, according to the manager's private notes, best left undisturbed and guests best left uninformed. A farmhouse in Normandy that had been the subject of a series of letters between the owner and a priest in the 1880s, the letters discussing at length what the owner described as the door that appears in the passage in winter, that carries no warmth but no menace, and that my father's father also knew. In each case, a door. In each case, its appearance at intervals, its departure after a period, its essential benignity. In each case, the specific quality that Mr. Ose had articulated and that Advoa had articulated before him. The sense that the building was honest. That it did not pretend this was all there was. And in each case, the residents and the owners had, eventually, arrived at the same accommodation that Arbor Court had arrived at. A relationship with the phenomenon that was neither denial nor engagement, but presence. The patient willingness to be in the same building as the door, to know it was there, to let it be what it was. The candle in the window. Chapter 32. On thresholds. A door is a threshold. This is its fundamental meaning, not the wooden or metal panel, not the frame, not the handle or the lock. The threshold. The crossing place. The liminal point between here and there, inside and outside, this and that. Every door in every building in the world is a threshold, but most of them are thresholds between known spaces. The threshold between apartment 4C and the corridor. The threshold between the corridor and the elevator. Known on both sides, traversable freely, there crossing and recrossing unremarkable. The door at the end of the corridor was a threshold between something known and something not. Between the corridor of the 4th floor and the other corridor, the one with the older light and the many doors and the voices. Between the ordinary interior of the building and whatever is adjacent to the ordinary interior of the building in the way that the exterior is adjacent to it, but through a different kind of wall. I have been thinking about thresholds since the door departed. About what it means to live in a building that has one of the other kind. Not the known on both sides kind. The kind where one side is this and the other side is something else. The architect in 1739 had said, "Costs nothing and may prevent misunderstanding with the workforce." He had made space for the door in his design. He had accommodated its existence without knowing its nature. I think this is, in the end, the appropriate response. Not because we know what it is. Not because we understand it. But because it is there, and it has always been there, and the people who lived with it and acknowledged it were, by their accounts and by every indication, not harmed by the acknowledgement. There is something on the other side. It breathes, once every 15 years, long enough to make a door. It has something it needs to be close to, or something it wants to offer. The old voices. The accumulated presences of people who have lived and died on the ground where the building stands. Daniel, who walked its corridor and heard his own name and was told he was early. Maybe he was. Maybe we all are. And the door is there to remind us. Chapter 33, Mr. Us's final account 3 months after the door's departure, I asked Mr. Us if he would speak for this record, not in conversation but formally, in the way of a testimony. He agreed. He spoke for nearly 2 hours. What follows is his account, condensed and lightly edited for clarity, with his agreement. I moved to Arbor Court because the rent was reasonable and the location was convenient, he said. I had no special relationship with old buildings, no particular interest in what might be called the uncanny. I was an engineer. I understood structures. I understood the relationship between load and support, between form and function, between what a building was designed to do and what it did. What I was not prepared for was the presence. I felt it the first day, walking the corridors. Not frightening. Not welcoming exactly. Something more neutral. The feeling of being in a space that knew it was a space. That had accumulated, in its 30 years by then of continuous habitation, something that went beyond the simply physical. I have spent 36 years trying to understand what that something is. And I think the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't think it's knowable in the way that engineering problems are knowable. I think it's of a different category. What I do know is what it is not. It is not dangerous. It is not malevolent. It is not interested in harm. Every manifestation I have witnessed, the doors in 1994 and 2006 and now, has had the quality of something reaching through a barrier not to take but to make contact. To be present, briefly, in proximity to the people on this side. My wife understood this immediately. She understood it in terms her tradition had given her, terms that acknowledged the permeability of the boundary between the living and the dead, that treated that permeability not as a threat but as a fact of the world, requiring accommodation rather than defense. What the door offers, I believe, is not entry. Or not primarily. It offers acknowledgement. It opens because something on the other side wants to be acknowledged. Wants to be close, for a period, to the living. Wants to feel, if feeling is the right word, the presence of people who are still in the world that the door borders. And what I did, on the night before the door closed, was to acknowledge it. That is all. I said. I hear you. I know you are there. Thank you. I don't know if what is on the other side can hear in any sense I would understand. I don't know if thank you landed anywhere. But it seemed to me the right thing to say. The right relationship to have with the door. Not to be afraid of it, not to try to open it, not to pretend it wasn't there. To say, I know you are there. I hear you. I am not ready yet. And to be grateful. For the building. For the ground. For the crossing place that has been there, under the names people have given it, for as long as people have been here to give it names. For the door that keeps coming back. Chapter 34 Suki, 6 months after I spoke with Suki, 6 months after the door's departure. She had become, during and after the event, someone I considered a friend in a way that the proximity of shared unusual experience generates, a friendship with a different foundation from the usual ones, built on a specific kind of mutual knowing. She had continued photographing the wall. There were, now, approximately 200 photographs of the blank cream wall at the end of the western corridor. She showed them to me on her laptop. I looked through them. They were not all the same. The wall, in photograph after photograph, was a wall. But in perhaps 1 in 20, taken at different times of day and in different lighting conditions, there was a quality in the wall's surface that was different from the others. A quality I am going to describe as depth. As if the wall in those particular photographs had more interior than walls ordinarily have. As if, at those moments, it was not quite as solid as it appeared. Not a door. Not an obvious anomaly. A quality. I don't show these to people generally, Suki said. Because I don't know what I'd say about them. What would you say if you had to? She thought for a moment. That it's still there, she said. Not active. Not the way it was active in January. But present. The thin spot is still thin. The crossing place is still a crossing place. She paused. And the building knows. The building knows, I repeated. The elevator went up to the 6th floor again last week, she said. Unprompted. I was in it. It opened on an empty corridor, and the doors stayed open for about 30 seconds and then closed. She looked at me. I said hello to whatever was there. I don't know why. It just seemed right. What happened? The doors closed and it went to the lobby, she said. Nothing happened. But it seemed right. Chapter 35 On living near a door. I have been in Arbor Court for 14 months now as I write this. The door appeared at month 3 and was gone at month 4, and I have lived with the aftermath of it since. What I can say about living near a door, or near the place where a door sometimes is this. It changes your relationship to the building in a way that deepens rather than destabilizes. The building is not less safe for containing the thin spot. It is more honest. More complete. As Advoa said, it does not pretend that this is all there is. I am aware, more than I was before, of the building as a layered thing. The apartment I inhabit is the current layer, my tenancy, my arrangement of furniture, my habits and my hours. Beneath it, the 41 other apartments and their current and recent occupants. Beneath that, the decades of previous residents, 42 apartments worth, the succession of lives that have been lived in this building since 1961. Beneath that, the Victorian terrace and the Georgian house and the field of uncertain purpose and the crossing place beneath all of it, present in every layer, known by a succession of names. I am one layer. A thin one, as layers go. I have been here 14 months. I may be here for years or I may move on. But I am here now, and the building contains me as it has contained everyone who came before, and the crossing place is in the ground under my feet, and the door will come again in 15 years or so, and someone will stand in the corridor and feel what I felt and think. There was no door here yesterday. I want them to know what I know. Or more precisely, I want them to know that someone before them knew. That Mr. Ose acknowledged it for 36 years. That Advoa spoke to the wall for 22. That a child named May said, I know you are there. That a 1739 architect chose to build around it rather than through it, and called it, without any apparent irony, a door. It is a door. It opens onto something we cannot fully see or fully name. It breathes with a rhythm that is not ours. And every 15 years, it comes back to be acknowledged. If you are reading this account and you find yourself in a building with a door that wasn't there before, in a corridor that feels different, in a place that has the quality of paying attention to something, pay attention back. Say hello to the elevator when it opens unprompted. Stand at the wall at the end of the corridor and say, I hear you. You don't have to know what you are speaking to. You just have to be willing to speak. Chapter 36, The Building in Summer, a Final Image. It is July. 8 months since the door departed. The city is warm and the light stays late, and the windows of Arbor Court are open in the way that buildings open in summer, breath exchanged between interior and exterior, the warmth of the city and the warmth of the building in a kind of communion. I am in the corridor. Not standing at the far end, not looking at the wall. Walking back from the elevator with shopping, on my way to 4C. An ordinary Tuesday evening in summer. Elena passes in the other direction. We exchange a few words about nothing specific. She has, since the door, taken to bringing me occasional things, a book she thinks I would like, surplus from her cooking, a plant cutting. The building made us neighbors in the way that shared unusual experiences make people neighbors. Closer than the accident of adjacent apartments would suggest. Mr. Ose is in his doorway, as he often is on warm evenings. He sees me coming and nods. Good evening, he says. Good evening, I say. I walk past his door, past 4B to 4C. I put my key in the lock. From the far end of the corridor, past Mr. Ose's door, past the wall where the door sometimes is the faintest warmth. Like the residual warmth of something recently here. Like a room just vacated, still holding the temperature of the person who occupied it. I pause for a moment, key in the lock. Then I turn and look toward the far end of the corridor. The wall is a wall. Plain cream, flat, seamless. The corridor is quiet. But something is there. Something is always there, in a building built on a crossing place. Something is always thinning and thickening in the wall at the end of the western corridor, breathing its long patient breath, waiting for the moment when it will be close enough to be visible. When it will be time again. I turn back to my door. Good night, I say, to the corridor, to the wall, to whatever is in the wall. I go inside. I am home. Part 5. Extended Testimonies Chapters 3746 Chapter 37 Elena. The 11 years before I asked Elena to give me an account of her 11 years in Arbor Court before the door appeared. What she had observed. What she had felt. How the building had been in the long ordinary stretch before the event. She thought about this for some time before answering. The honest answer, she said, is that I always knew there was something. Not the door specifically. I had no knowledge of the previous incidents. Mr. Jose had not told me about 1994 or 2006. But the quality of the building. The presence. I felt it from the first month. And you stayed. I stayed because the feeling was not threatening, she said. There is a category of things that feel unusual without feeling dangerous, and this was in that category. It was, how to say it, the building felt inhabited in a way that went beyond the people living in it. As if there were more residents than the 40-some people I could name. As if the building held more than was currently visible. Did it affect your life here? She was quiet for a moment. It affected my relationship to the building in a specific way, she said. I was more careful with it than I might otherwise have been. Not with maintenance, with regard. With the way I moved through it. Not with ceremony or ritual. I'm not that kind of person. But with a quality of attention. The way you are careful with something you respect. And the 11 years before the door were the years of learning to pay attention properly, she said. To not explain away the quality of the place. To let it be what it was. A pause. In some ways, the door was a confirmation. Everything I had been sensing for 11 years, made visible. Made real in a form that couldn't be explained away. She looked at me. It was, actually, a relief. Chapter 38 Paul Draper. The explanation that failed Paul Draper, true to his word, had abandoned his maintenance error theory by the end of the first week. But he had, in the months since the door's departure, continued to think about why the theory had failed and what that failure meant. I'm an insurance adjuster, he said, in one of the corridor conversations that continued after the door departed. My job is, essentially, to find the explanation. To identify what happened and why and who bears responsibility. It's not an adversarial job, despite what people think, it's an investigative one. You gather facts, you build a picture, you arrive at a conclusion. And the door. The door defeated that process, he said. And I've been thinking about why. About what category of thing defeats that process. And what I keep coming back to is, the process fails when the event doesn't have a cause in the way we mean by cause. Not a mysterious cause, not an unexplained cause, but when the category of cause and effect that the process assumes doesn't apply. You mean the door didn't have a cause. I mean the door's cause, if it has one, is in a different category from the causes I know how to investigate, he said. The way a piece of music has a cause, a composer, a notation, an instrument, a player, but the cause of what the music does to you, what it means, why this particular sequence of notes produces this particular response in this particular person, that's not the same kind of cause. It's real. The effect is real. But the causal chain is different in kind. He paused. I've started thinking about a lot of things in terms of whether the appropriate question is what caused this or what does this mean, he said. The door was a what does this mean event. and I spent the first week asking the wrong question. Chapter 39, The Building Manager's Reflection. I spoke with Harrigan again, 4 months after the door's departure, this time over coffee rather than in the building. He had asked for the meeting, a reversal of our initial dynamic. He wanted, he said, to understand what had happened. Not technically, he had accepted that a technical understanding was not available, but to understand it in whatever terms were available. I shared with him what Mr. Ose had told me about the history. The 1739 architect's letter, Adwoa and her relationship with the wall, the Georgian house and what had been in the ground before it. He listened carefully and did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The previous manager told me, at handover, that the building occasionally did things, he said. That's how he put it. Things. He said it in the way people say things when they have specific experiences they're not prepared to name. I understood that there had been incidents. I logged the maintenance reports as anomalies and noted the file. I told myself that if it happened again, I would handle it the way previous managers had handled it. And when it did happen, I was not as calm as I projected, he said. Standing in front of that door, I was not calm. But I was also not as surprised as I should have been. He paused. I think the building had been preparing me. 11 years of working in it, visiting it, sitting in the lobby, walking the corridors. 11 years of that quality you describe. The presence. I had been attributing it to age, to the specific character of mid-century construction, to the accumulated wear of 6 decades of habitation. And now? Now I think it was the other thing, he said. And I think I always knew it was the other thing, and had been choosing not to know it. A pause. I'm not sure what to do with that, professionally. A building with a door onto another dimension is not something my contract has a clause for. The 1739 architect built around it, I said. Without a clause. He smiled slightly, unexpectedly. Costs nothing, he said, and may prevent misunderstanding with the workforce. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly. I think, he said, that I will manage the building differently going forward. With more, I suppose the word is respect. For what it is. For what's in it. A pause. I've been managing it as a structure. I think I should be managing it as a place. Chapter 40, Voices Through Old Walls. This chapter is not about Arbor Court specifically. It is about a pattern I found in the extended research I conducted in the months after the door's departure. A pattern of people describing voices heard through the walls of old buildings. Not dramatic voices. Not voices making demands or issuing warnings or calling names. Voices in the way that Mr. Feldman had described the sound from the corridor. Muffled, tonally present, linguistically indistinct. The awareness of speech without the accessibility of words. The certain knowledge that someone is speaking without the ability to hear what they say. This experience is remarkably widely reported. It appears in the private letters and diaries of people across centuries, across cultures, across widely varying contexts. It is reported from old houses, old apartment buildings, old hotels, old churches, old farmhouses. From structures old enough to have housed multiple generations of habitation. From places where, in the most straightforward historical sense, a great many people have spent a great deal of time. The conventional explanation, and it is a real explanation, not a dismissal, is that old buildings transmit sound in complex ways, that the materials of old construction carry sound differently from modern materials, that voices from adjacent rooms or from outside the building travel through walls and floors in ways that degrade their legibility while preserving their auditory character. This is true. It happens. It explains many reports. But not, I think, all of them. Some accounts, and I read dozens, in the research of these months, have a quality that does not fit the acoustic explanation. A quality of direction that does not correspond to any identifiable source. A quality of persistence across times of day when no one is in adjacent spaces. A quality of emotional character that audio conducted through walls does not typically have, the sense that the voice, while not lexically intelligible, is nevertheless communicating something. Daniel, in Mr. Us's account, said that as he stood in the corridor beyond the door, the voices clarified the longer he listened. As if his ear was adjusting. As if he was tuning. And one voice, behind one door, became clear enough to speak his name. I am not prepared to say what voices in the walls of old buildings are. I am prepared to say that the experience of hearing them is real, that it is widespread, and that dismissing it entirely requires more confidence in the acoustic explanation than the evidence warrants. Something speaks, sometimes, through old walls. Whether it has always been speaking, whether we are the ones who sometimes come into range of it, whether the old buildings are simply the places where the membrane is thinnest and therefore the voice carries furthest, I don't know. But I listen. Chapter 41, The Child. 1 year later, Machung was 5 when I last spoke with her, a year after the door had gone. The same composed directness, the same quality of having decided what to say before she said it. I asked her if she thought about the door. She said, sometimes. I asked what she thought about it. She said, I think it's having a rest. I asked when it would come back. She said, when I'm bigger. She thought for a moment. Bigger than now but not biggest. I asked what would happen when it came back. She looked at me with the patience of a child who has already answered this question and finds the need to repeat herself unreasonable but is being polite about it. I open it, she said. I already said. I asked whether that was exciting or scary. She thought about this seriously. Both, she said. And then, after a moment. But mostly exciting. Because the one who came before wants to show me something. I asked what. She looked toward the corridor. They were in their apartment, and the corridor was beyond the front door, and beyond the corridor the wall, and in the wall the door that was currently resting. She said, I don't know yet. That's the exciting part. She picked up a toy and began to play with it, the conversation complete from her perspective. I sat for a moment with the particular quality of a child's certainty. The uncomplicated relationship with things that adults have complicated by wanting them to be on adult terms. The readiness that came from not yet knowing how impossible things are supposed to be. The one who came before wants to show me something. And she is not afraid. She is 5 years old and she is not afraid. Chapter 42 on memory and place. There is a kind of memory that is not in the mind. Not in any individual mind, not in any living brain. A memory distributed through matter, through the physical substance of places, through the wood and stone and brick and glass of buildings, through the ground under the buildings. I do not mean this in the sense of quantum effects or cellular biology or any scientific framework I could invoke and immediately abandon. I mean it more simply. That places are changed by what happens in them. That change is, in some sense, a record. That a place where a great deal has happened is different physically, materially, in some way that resists full reduction to identifiable causes, from a place where nothing much has. Old buildings carry this. The specific quality of Arbor Court, the presence, is the quality of a structure that has been changed by 60 years of habitation, and beneath it the changes of the Victorian terrace and the Georgian house and the field, all the way back to whatever the first people who stood on that ground called it in the first language they used. The door is part of that memory. The crossing place is part of it. The thin spot in the wall is the accumulated result of centuries of acknowledgement of people knowing that this specific place was what it was and responding to it. The architect who built around it. The people who gave it names. Advoa, who stood at the wall and spoke quietly to what was there. Mr. Ose, who for 36 years paid his respects. Memory accretes. Memory in matter accretes slowly, with the patience of geological processes. The thin spot is thin partly because the ground in that place has always been a crossing place and partly because generations of acknowledgement have kept it so. Have maintained its thinness by refusing to let it be forgotten, to let it thicken back into the mere materiality of ground. The door comes back every 15 years because the place remembers itself. Because the acknowledgement continues. Because there are people, in each generation, who pay attention. Chapter 43, Other Corridors. I have been thinking, since the door's departure, about the other corridor. The one Daniel described. The one Eleanor dreamed. The one with the older light and the many doors. I have been trying to understand what kind of place it is. Daniel said. Another corridor, like the corridor on the second floor, same dimensions, same layout, but different in quality. The light older. More doors than were possible given the space. More doors than were possible. What would that mean? A corridor with more doors than the space could geometrically contain suggests a space that does not obey the geometry of the space it resembles. A corridor that holds more than its dimensions allow. A space that is larger inside than outside, which is impossible, but impossible in the way that the door itself is impossible, which is to say, impossible by the rules of the ordinary world. The doors behind which voices spoke. Behind which, Daniel had said, you could hear sounds that clarified with attention. That became legible the longer you listened. And behind one of which a voice had said his name, and told him he was early. Early. Not wronged, not unwelcome, not lost. Early. As if there were a time when he would be expected and he had arrived before it. As if the corridor had a schedule, and he was on it, and he had simply come before his appointment. I have thought a great deal about what it means to be early. It means that the right time is ahead. That what is expected is coming. That the door, when it opens for him at the right time, when he is no longer early, will open onto something prepared for his arrival. I am comforted by this more than I can fully explain. Not because I expect anything specifically. Not because I have beliefs about what follows life that I am prepared to defend. But because the quality of early, the quality of something being prepared, of a time being coming, of an appointment not missed but deferred, is a quality of care. The corridor beyond the door is a corridor that cares about its visitors, that knows them well enough to know when they are early, that is, in some fundamental sense, arranged for them, as the building is arranged for its residents, as the crossing place has been accommodated into the foundations and the plans and the maintenance logs and the handover conversations and the decades of quiet acknowledgement. As everything, perhaps, is arranged for what it contains. Chapter 44, 14 months. I have been in Arbor Court for 14 months. In that time I have experienced what I have described, and have spoken with the people who experienced it with me, and have written it down as accurately as I can. The apartment is mine in the way that things become yours when you have been through something in them. Not just lived in, been through. The specific quality of ownership that is not about the lease or the deposit or any legal claim but about the accumulation of experience. The way the walls know me now. The way I know the walls. I ran into a woman in the lobby last week who was there to look at the vacant apartment on the second floor, the one that has been empty since a resident moved out earlier in the year. She was in her 30s, looking for something affordable in a convenient location. The apartment was both. She asked me how I liked the building. I thought about how to answer. I thought about the presence, and the door, and the corridor gatherings, and Mr. Ose at the end of the hallway with his hand on the door. I thought about Ma saying, "I know you are there." I thought about the 1739 architect and his careful accommodation of what the local people called a crossing place. I said, "It's a good building to live in." She asked, "Why?" I said, "Because it's honest. It doesn't pretend this is all there is." She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who is not sure if they have just been given useful information or something stranger. Then she said, "Okay," and went to look at the apartment. I don't know if she took it. But I hope, if she did, that she felt it. The presence. The quality. The honest weight of a building that contains more than it shows. And I hope that when the door comes back, in 15 years, more or less, when Ma is old enough and it is time, she is ready. Chapter 45, What doors are? A door is a decision made in the fabric of a structure. Not a wall. A door. The decision that this solid surface should not be entirely solid. That here, at this point, the wall should yield. That what is on one side should have access to what is on the other. That the boundary, while real, should not be absolute. Every building is a series of these decisions. The rooms it contains and the connections between them are all the result of choices about where to place walls and where to place doors, where to permit crossing and where to prevent it, what should be inside and what should be outside, and where the transition between the two should occur. The door at the end of the corridor was a decision too. A decision made in the fabric of something older than the building, in the fabric of whatever is under the building. The decision that here, at this place, the boundary between the ordinary world and what is adjacent to it should not be entirely solid. That here, at intervals, there should be a crossing place. It is not our decision. We did not make it, and we cannot unmake it. The 1739 architect understood this and built around it. The management companies understood it and filed it under no action required. The residents of multiple generations understood it and spoke to the wall and stood in the corridor at night and paid attention. And the crossing place is still there. Will always be there, perhaps. Not because we want it to be, though increasingly I do, but because it was there before we arrived and has been acknowledged consistently enough across the centuries that it has not been forgotten. A thin spot in the world. A place where the membrane between here and the other corridor is close enough to let light through. Not often. Not freely. But periodically, in its own time, on its own schedule. A door. And behind it, the older light. And the many doors. And the voices that clarify, if you stand still enough and listen long enough, into words. Into your own name, perhaps. And the information that you are early. That there is time yet. That what waits for you on the other side will wait a little longer. And when you are ready, when the time is right, and the building opens again, and the door comes back, it will be there. Waiting. As it has always been waiting. On the other side of the wall. Chapter 46, the wall at the end of the corridor. This is the last thing I want to say. The wall at the end of the western corridor on the 4th floor of Arbor Court is a wall. Plain cream-painted plaster over a structural core. Approximately 22 centimeters thick. Built in 1961, last repainted in 2019, showing no signs of deterioration or defect. It is a wall. And it is also more than a wall. I pass it every day. I walk the corridor to and from the elevator, and I pass the point where the door was, and I feel something. Not always. Not dramatically. But often enough, in the way of a thing that keeps reminding you of itself, a small warmth. A quality of proximity, of something close, of the membrane thin. I stop, sometimes. I put my hand flat against the wall. I stand there for a moment. I don't say anything out loud. But in whatever register my attention operates, in the part of me that felt the door before it appeared, that woke at 2 a.m. to the breathing, that stood in the corridor in the dark with the other residents and watched Mr. Ose place his palm on the glowing wood in that register, I say, I know you are there. And I say, I'm not ready yet. And I say, but I hear you. And sometimes, in the specific quality of the silence that follows, the wall seems to say something back. Not words. Not a voice. Just a quality of the silence that might be acknowledgement. That might be. I know. I hear you too. We will be here when you are ready. The door will come back. And it will be time. And the door at the end of the hallway was never there before. A WhisperVoid documentary narrative. All characters and events are fictional. All feelings are real. Appendix. Further accounts and documents. Document A. Transcript of recorded interview. Mr. Solomon Ose conducted 14 weeks after the door's departure. Unedited transcript. The interview took place in apartment 4A. The afternoon was grey. Mr. Ose had made tea. What follows is the full recording, transcribed with his permission, including the silences, which I have indicated with a dash. Q. Tell me about the first time you saw a door that should not have been there. A. It was 1994. I was 54 years old. I had been living in this building for 7 years. I was, by that time, accustomed to the quality of the building, the presence, as I have described it. I had accepted it as a feature of the place, the way one accepts a particular quality of light in a room, or a tendency of the heating pipes to make a certain sound in cold weather. It was not alarming. It was simply there. The door in 1994 appeared on the third floor. I became aware of it because a resident of the third floor, a woman I knew slightly, a Mrs. Hobbs, who has since died, mentioned it to me in the lobby. She said, "Have you heard about the door on the third floor?" I said I had not. She described it. I went and looked. Q. What was your reaction? A. I am trying to remember honestly. I think the honest answer is that I was not as surprised as I should have been. There was something in my response that was more like recognition than shock. As if I had been expecting something of this kind, not as a specific prediction but as a general readiness. The building had been telling me for 7 years, in its quiet way, that it was capable of more than the ordinary. The door was the ordinary made visible. If that makes sense. Q. Did you try to open it? A. No. I looked at it for some time. I found it locked. I did not persist. It did not seem, to me, like a door that was meant to be opened by force or impatience. It seemed like a door that required something else. I could not have said, at the time, what that something else was. I simply understood that force and impatience were not it. Q. Did you speak to the other residents of the third floor? A. Some. There were 12 apartments on the third floor, as on every floor. Not all residents were open to the conversation. People have their own ways of managing things they cannot explain. Some prefer not to discuss them. I respect this. But I spoke with those who were willing, and I found that the responses were distributed in the way I would expect. Some frightened, some fascinated, some determinedly unimpressed, and a few, perhaps 3 or 4, who had a relationship to the door similar to mine. A quality of recognition. As if they had been expecting something. Q. You mentioned previously that a young man heard music through the door. A. Yes. A young man on the third floor, I knew him as Marcus, I do not recall his surname, said he had stood at the door one evening for a long time and had heard, very faintly, music. He described it as old music. Music with the quality of recordings made before high-fidelity sound reproduction, a slight hollowness, a warmth that he associated with the way his grandparents' records had sounded. He said it was not any piece he recognized. A melody he could not have named. But one that, he said, made him feel that he had missed something. Not missed in the sense of sorrow, missed in the sense of having arrived just after something ended. Q. Did you hear anything? A. I stood at the door on several evenings during the 11 days. I heard nothing through the wood itself. But I was aware, in the nights, of something at the edge of audibility. Not music. A quality of sound that was beneath sound, in the register of feeling rather than hearing. I could not be certain it was related to the door. I could not be certain it was not. Q. After the door disappeared in 1994, what changed? A. Something settled. I do not know how else to describe it. The building, which had been in a certain state of activation, is not quite the right word, but it will serve, returned to its ordinary quality. The presence was still there. But it was quieter, more at rest, as if it had done what it needed to do and was now content. Advoa said to me when the door went, "It has breathed out." I asked her what she meant. She said, "It breathes in and the door comes. It breathes out and the door goes." She said this as if it were a simple mechanical fact, not a metaphor. She was a person who did not over-elaborate things she understood. I have thought about what she said many times in the years since. Q. The second incident, 2006, was more dramatic. You mentioned a man named Daniel. A. Yes. The second incident was more present, more insistent. I think the word is insistent. The first incident had been gentle. A door appearing, people noticing, nothing else of significance occurring. The second was different from the beginning. The door was not at the end of the corridor but in the middle of it, between two apartments, which meant that every resident of the second floor had to pass it to reach the elevator. There was no way to avoid it. It was in the daily path of everyone who lived on that floor. And Daniel was a man who could not leave things alone. This is not a criticism. It is a description. He was an architect by training, as I have said. He had a professional relationship to the idea of space, of what buildings do and do not contain, of what is possible and what is not. The door, to Daniel, was a problem to be solved. A question to be answered. He could no more walk past it twice a day for 3 weeks without engaging with it than he could have stopped breathing. Q. Did you advise him not to? A. I tried. Not in strong terms. I had no grounds for strong terms. I had no information that going through the door would harm him. I had only a sense that the door's terms were not Daniel's terms, and that the mismatch might produce difficulties. I said something like, "Be careful about the kind of attention you bring to it." He asked what I meant. I said, "It may respond to some kinds of attention differently than others." He nodded as if this made sense to him, which, given his professional background, it probably did, and went away. He disappeared on the 18th day of the door's presence. He was found 3 days later in a town 70 miles away. When he came to me, before his move, he sat in this chair and told me what had happened. Q. As you described it before, the corridor, the voices, his name. A. Yes. But there were other things he told me that I have not yet shared with you. Q. What things? A. He said the corridor was not static. When he first entered it, it was as I described. Another corridor, the same dimensions, the older light, the many doors. But as he remained in it, and he remained for what seemed to him a very long time, though whether that time corresponded to the 3 days of his absence or to something else entirely he could not say, the corridor changed. Not physically. The walls did not move, the doors did not multiply further. The change was in quality, in presence. He said it was as if the corridor was becoming more aware of him the longer he was there. As if his presence in it was registering somewhere and producing a response. Not a response he could see or hear directly. A response in the temperature of the air, in the quality of the light, in the specific way that the silence of a place changes when the place is paying attention to you. Q. Did he feel he was in danger? A. No. He was clear about this. He said at no point did he feel threatened, unwanted, at risk. He said, in fact, the opposite. He said that the corridor, or whatever was in the corridor, whatever was behind the many doors, had a quality of welcome that he found both unexpected and, he said, deeply moving. That the welcome was not the welcome of a human gathering, not a warmth in the social sense. It was something more fundamental. The welcome of a place that has been expecting you. That has your specific shape already made in it, the way a long-used chair has the specific shape of the person who sits in it. Q. He used the phrase "you are early." Yes. That came from a specific moment. He had been in the corridor for some unmeasurable time, moving along it, listening at doors. And then one voice, as I have described, became clear. Said his name. Said, "You are early." He asked, "Early for what?" And the voice said, "For when you are ready to stay." He was quiet for a moment after telling me this. Then he said, I understood what it meant. I understood that the corridor was available to him. That he had a place in it. That the place was his when his time came, and that his time had not yet come, and that this was not a deprivation but an accommodation. The door had let him see what was waiting for him, and then sent him back, because it was not yet the right moment. Q. Was he afraid of this knowledge? A. He was, I would say he was undone by it. Not in the sense of damage. In the sense of being taken apart and reassembled around a different understanding. He said he had spent his professional life thinking about space, about what built space does, how it holds people, how the relationship between a person and the rooms they inhabit shapes both the person and the room. And now he had been inside a space that had been thinking about him. That had his name. That was waiting. And the professional vocabulary he had spent a career building was entirely inadequate to the fact of it. He moved away because, he said, he could not live on the second floor of Arbor Court and pass the wall where the door had been every day with the knowledge of what was on the other side. He said, it is too close. He meant the knowledge, not the place. The place he could manage. The knowledge was more intimate than he was ready to carry in his daily life. I understood this. I have carried a version of it for 17 years, since Advoa died, and I understood that she was there, not here, but there, on the other side, in the corridor with the older light. I carry it with more ease now. But it took time. Q. One last question. The night the door closed this time, when you spoke to it, what were you feeling? A. Ready. I was feeling ready. Not to go through, I am not ready for that, and I know the difference now between the readiness I have and the readiness that is required. But ready to acknowledge. To say the thing out loud that I had been saying, in the way of feeling and of private thought, for 36 years. I knew she was there, on the other side. I knew that when the door opened this time, she was among those who came close to it. And I wanted her to hear me. Not to hear anything specific, not a message, not a farewell, not the things one wishes one had said. Simply, I hear you. I know you are there. I am still here, and I know you are there, and this has been enough for me. This has been a great deal. I think it was enough for her too. Document B. Transcript of recorded interview. Suki Nakamura conducted 16 weeks after the door's departure. Edited for length with her agreement. Q. When did you first understand that what you were experiencing was not going to resolve into an ordinary explanation? A. Day 2. I walked past it twice on day 1 and told myself I had imagined the night before that the door had always been there and I had simply not noticed. This is the first story you tell yourself. It requires you to accept that you have been walking past something for 8 months and not once registered it. I could not quite make that story work, but I tried. Day 2, I walked to the end of the corridor specifically to check. And standing in front of it directly, in good light, with nothing to do but look at it, no, there was no version of that door that had always been there, and I had always missed it. It was new. It was specific. It was wrong in the way that a thing is wrong when it violates a rule so fundamental you have never had occasion to articulate the rule before. Q. What rule? A. That walls do not make doors on their own. That the built environment is stable. That I can trust the evidence of my eyes about what exists in a space I inhabit. All of these rules, I found, I had never consciously registered because they had never been violated. They were the substrate. They were what everything else rested on. And here was this door, this specific violation, and the substrate was still there underneath me, but it had a crack in it. Q. And the photography. Why photography? A. Because looking at something is not the same as recording it. When I look at something I don't understand, my brain does something actively unhelpful. It starts explaining. It starts filling in, reaching for the nearest available category, trying to make the thing legible by assimilating it to something it already knows. Photography stops this. A photograph does not explain. It only shows. I needed something that would show me the door without immediately trying to explain the door. Q. And as the days went on, what did the photographs show you? A. The progression. The thing under the door. The way it moved. When I showed you the day 5 photograph, you had not seen it before that moment. And the way you looked at it told me that what I was seeing was real, that I was not interpreting the image in a way that my readiness to see something was producing. You saw it too. The wrong shadow, moving the wrong direction, accumulating over days. What the photographs also showed me was something about the door's patience. That the movement was so slow. So deliberate. A few millimeters a day. Whatever was on the other side was not urgent. Was not pressing. Was not demanding entry or forcing an outcome. It was simply proceeding. At a pace that felt less like the pace of something trying to get through and more like the pace of something that was already exactly as close as it needed to be, and was simply making itself progressively visible. Q. Like something becoming more present rather than moving toward you. A. Exactly that. Yes. That is the accurate description. Not approach. Presence. It was always there, it was there before the door appeared, as I said. I felt it in the corridor days before. But it was becoming more visible. Coming into a kind of focus. The photographs documented a process of clarification rather than a process of arrival. Q. After the door went, you kept photographing the wall. A. I will always photograph the wall. Not because I expect to see another door, or not only because of that. Because the wall is now, to me, a different kind of thing than it was before. It is the same wall, physically. Same plaster, same paint. But I know what it is. I know what is on the other side of it, which is not a gap and pipes and the exterior of the building as the plans describe, but whatever the plans do not describe, whatever is in the space that the 1739 architect refused to excavate. The photographs are a way of maintaining the relationship with that knowledge. Of not letting it go ordinary again. Of keeping the memory of the door present in the way of a photograph on a wall visible every day, preventing the forgetting that dailiness produces. Q. Do you see anything in the photographs of the blank wall? A. Sometimes. Not always. Approximately 1 in 20. A quality in the wall's surface that I cannot describe precisely. If I call it depth, you will think I mean a three-dimensional effect, a distortion of the flat surface. That is not what I mean. I mean a quality of the image itself. A sense that the photograph is showing me more of the wall than the wall physically contains. That it is showing me the wall and something else at the same time. I showed these photographs to a photographer I know, a professional, technically excellent, who has been working with analog and digital photography for 20 years. She looked through the full sequence and told me that the photographs I had flagged showed no artifacts, no lens effects, no processing anomalies. She could not identify any technical cause for the quality I was describing. She looked at the flagged photographs for a long time and then said, "It does look different, doesn't it?" That was all she said. It does look different. I thought that was an honest and sufficient response. Document C, a note found in the building's archive filed, without date or signature, in a manila envelope marked 4th floor. The note is handwritten, in a clear and confident hand, on paper that has yellowed slightly at the edges. I estimate it to be perhaps 30 to 40 years old, though I cannot be certain. It was not folded or sealed. It was simply placed in the envelope. It reads as follows. If you are reading this, then the door has come back. Or you have found this note and are wondering what it means, in which case you will find out soon enough. My name is not important. I lived on the 4th floor for 11 years and am now leaving. Not because of the door has been and gone twice in my time here and I have made my peace with it. I am leaving because the apartment has become too large for one person and it is time for something smaller. What I want to say to whoever comes after me is this. Do not be afraid of it. I know that is easy to say and hard to do when you are standing in the corridor at night and there is a door that was not there the day before and some quality of sound in the building that does not correspond to anything mechanical. I know that fear is the first response, and that it is a reasonable one. It does not know what you know, and it responds to the unknown with appropriate caution. But this particular unknown is not dangerous. It has been in this building, or under this building, or adjacent to this building in whatever way things are adjacent when they are not in the same dimension, for as long as the building has been here and for much longer before that. It has been part of the life of this place in every generation of its occupation. And in all that time, it has not harmed anyone. What it does is remind. It appears, and in appearing it reminds whoever is paying attention that this is not all there is. That the wall at the end of the corridor is a border and not an ending. That what is on the other side is not nothing and not empty and not indifferent to us. I have spent 11 years learning to be grateful for this reminder. I was not grateful at first. At first I was frightened, and then I was skeptical, and then, when it came back the second time, and I stood in the corridor with the other residents and we all felt the thing we all felt, I was something else. Something I did not have a word for then, and do not have a better word for now than held. The building holds more than its residents. It holds what its residents have been. It holds what they are going to be. The door is the building's way of letting you know this. Of making visible, for a period, the part of itself that is always there but not always visible. Pay attention. That is all. Pay attention, and do not be afraid, and when the time comes to say something to the door, and the time will come, for at least one of you, in every generation, say it. Say, I hear you. It is enough. Goodbye to the building. Thank you for the years. Document D, a letter, undated, found between the pages of a book left in the building's communal library shelf in the lobby. The book was a copy of a novel, the title of which is not relevant. The letter was a bookmark. It was not addressed to anyone. The letter reads, I moved here 3 months ago after a difficult year. I am not going to describe the difficult year because that is not what this is about. What I want to say is that I have found something here that I was not expecting to find, which is a sense that the place I am living in is on my side. I know how that sounds. Buildings are not on anyone's side. Buildings are constructions of material and labor designed to fulfill specific functions, maintained or not maintained according to the resources of their owners, inhabited by whoever can afford the rent. They are not on your side. They are not anything, they do not care. I knew all of this before I moved here. I know it still, in the part of me that holds these things as facts. But there is another part of me, a part that has been very quiet for a long time, very still, very not speaking, and that part has been doing something since I moved in that I can only describe as relaxing. The way a held breath releases. The way a body slowly unclenches from a long period of tension. The building feels like it knows I am here. Not in a way I could demonstrate. Not in a way that would convince anyone who has not felt it. But the quality of the corridor in the morning, the specific sound of the elevator arriving when I call it, the light in my apartment at the particular angle it has in the late afternoon, these things have a character to them that I can only describe as attentive. As if the building is paying attention to me in the way that people you trust pay attention to you. Not watching. Attending. There is a difference. I have also noticed the wall at the end of the 4th floor corridor. I do not know why I notice it. There is nothing to see there, it is a wall. But I stop at it sometimes, on my way back from the elevator, and I put my hand on it, and I feel something. Warmth that is not temperature. Presence that is not person. I do not know what this is. I am new here, and I have not yet spoken to the other residents about it. Perhaps they will think I am strange for noticing. Perhaps they will tell me that this is a building like every other building, and that what I am feeling is the effect of a difficult year on a susceptible mind. Perhaps they will tell me something else. I am going to stay here and find out. Document E, notes from the author. Written 15 months after moving in. I have been carrying these notes for some time, adding to them and revising them and wondering what to do with them. I started writing them the day after the door appeared, in the journalist's habit of documentation, and I have not been able to stop. The account has grown beyond what I anticipated. The events themselves were not dramatic, no one was hurt, no one was transformed in the ways that dramatic narratives require. But the events were real, and the people in them were real, and what the events produced in those people was real, and I felt that the reality deserved documentation. I want to say something, here at the end, about what I have come to understand. I moved to Arbor Court in a state of considerable personal disorientation. A relationship had ended, a version of my life had ended, and I was in the way of someone who has lost a familiar geography, unsure of my bearings. I was not, I think, in a particularly receptive state. If anything, I was in a state of defended practicality, of keeping things manageable, of not opening myself to more than I could currently handle. And then the door appeared. And the door, as I have tried to describe, required something that defended practicality cannot supply. It required peripheral vision, as Elena said. Attention without agenda. The willingness to be present with something inexplicable without immediately requiring it to be explicable. Without requiring it to be anything, in fact, other than what it was. I did not, I should say, find this easy. I found it very hard. I am not, by nature or training, a person who sits comfortably with open questions. The journalist's instinct is toward closure, toward the account that covers what happened and why. The door did not offer this. The door offered something different. Not an answer but a quality of presence. Not resolution but contact. What I found, in learning to sit with this, in learning the peripheral attention that the door seemed to require, was that the skill transferred. That the orientation I had developed toward the door, toward the thin spot, toward the unexplained fact of the corridor and the sounds at 2 a.m., this orientation began to apply elsewhere. To other inexplicable things. To the larger inexplicable things that I had spent a great deal of energy not looking at directly. The loss of the relationship, the question of what I was for, the ordinary existential bewilderment of being 34 and uncertain and alone. I am not going to claim that the door solved any of these problems. It did not. I am still 34, still in the process of renegotiating the terms of a life, still uncertain about many things that I would prefer to be certain about. But the relationship between me and the uncertainty is different. Less defended. More attended, to use the word that keeps returning. I attend to the uncertainty instead of managing it. I put my hand on it, as Mr. Ose put his hand on the door, and I say, I know you are there. And I do not require it to be other than what it is. This is, I think, what the building taught me. Which is a strange thing to say. But Mr. Ose would not find it strange. Elena would not find it strange. The anonymous author of the note in the archive would not find it strange. Advoa, who stood at the wall for 22 years and spoke quietly to what was there, would not have found it strange at all. It is a good building to live in. Because it is honest. It does not pretend this is all there is. Document F. Exchange of messages between the narrator and Elena Vasquez 6 months after the door's departure. Shared with Elena's permission. Narrator. I keep thinking about what Daniel's voice said to him. You are early. I keep coming back to it. Elena. I know. Me too. Narrator. What does early mean to you? When you think about it for yourself. Elena. It means there is more to do. It means the work is not finished. It means the place on the other side is real, and it is prepared, and it has your shape in it already, the way a long-used chair has your shape. But you are not ready to sit in it yet because there is still something here that requires your presence. I find this very comforting. Narrator. Do you believe it literally? That there is a place with your shape in it? Elena. I believe it in the way I believe anything I have experienced and cannot fully account for. With the part of me that is prior to the belief-forming mechanisms. With the part that was in the corridor on the 21st night and felt what it felt. Whether it is literally true in the way that the building's address is literally true, I don't know. I don't think the question of literal truth is the right question for this category of thing. I think the right question is, does it help you live? Does it help you be present in the time you have, and to carry that time with more patience and less fear? And the answer to that, for me, is yes. Narrator. Yes, for me too. Elena. Then that is enough. And if it is also literally true, if there is a corridor with an older light and a door with your name behind it, that is, as Mr. Ose would say, a great deal. Document G, final note, written on the day this account was completed. I walked the corridor this morning. The ordinary morning walk from 4C to the elevator, carrying the ordinary weight of an ordinary day. I passed apartment 4A. Mr. Ose's door was closed. He does not always open it at this hour. I did not knock. I passed 4B. I reached the end of the corridor and stopped. The wall was a wall. I stood in front of it for a moment. And I said, quietly, the things I always say now. The things that Mr. Ose said on the 21st night, the things that everyone who has paid attention to this wall has said in their own words in their own time, the things that the note in the archive said, that the letter in the book said, that the building itself says, in its way, in the quality of its presence, to everyone who is attentive enough to hear it. I know you are there. I hear you. I am not ready yet. And thank you. The wall was a wall. But the silence that followed had a quality I have come to recognize. The quality of something heard. I turned and went about my day. I will be back tomorrow. I am always back. That is the thing about living in a building built on a crossing place. You come back. Every day you walk the corridor and you stop at the wall and you say the words. And the wall, in its own way, says them back. And between the two of you, the living and the wall, and whatever is in the wall and the ground under the wall and the centuries of acknowledgement in the ground, between all of that, something that might be called connection persists. Not communication. Connection. The knowledge that you are known. That the place you inhabit inhabits you in return. That the corridor goes further than it appears to go. And that someday, at the right time, when you are no longer early, the door will be there. And you will be ready. And you will open it. And the older light will be exactly as you imagined it. Complete and supplementary section. Residency accounts from other floors in the months following the door's departure from the 4th floor. Word of the event spread slowly through the building's other floors, not through any announcement, not through any deliberate disclosure, but through the natural channels of communal living in a building where people share an elevator and a lobby and a laundry room in the basement and, inevitably, conversations. The nature of what spread was not sensational. There was no version of the story that became building legend, no dramatic retelling that gathered embellishments as it passed from resident to resident. What spread was something quieter. A knowledge that something had happened on the fourth floor, a curiosity about it, and, in the people who were predisposed to curiosity about such things, a willingness to share their own experiences of the building. I spent several weeks in the spring following the door's departure talking to residents from the other floors of Arbor Court. What I found is documented below. From the second floor was, of all the floors, the most charged with specific history. It was, after all, the floor on which Daniel had lived and from which he had disappeared in 2006. This history was not widely known in the building. The official version of Daniel's disappearance had been, as Harrigan had acknowledged, the mental health episode. But among the longer-term residents it was known in the way that building histories are always known. Incompletely, variably, with the specific texture of second-hand information that has been shaped by the teller's own relationship to the events. A woman named Patricia, who had lived on the second floor for 9 years, told me she had always known about the 2006 incident. Not in detail, not the door, not the corridor beyond it, but in the general sense that something had happened on the floor before her time that had altered the quality of the place. There is a section of the corridor, she said, between apartments 2F and 2G where the air is different. Not warmer or colder. Different in quality. I noticed it the first month I was here, and have been noticing it ever since. I don't walk past it without being aware of it. I asked her what the quality was. She thought for a long time before answering. Charged, she said finally. The way the air near electrical equipment sometimes feels charged. Not an electric field, nothing like that. But the same quality of the air having more going on in it than is visible. I asked if she had ever heard about the door in 2006. She looked at me carefully. I'd heard there was something, she said. I didn't know the specifics. I've been deciding for 9 years whether I wanted to know the specifics. And now? Tell me, she said. Yes. Now tell me. I told her, as briefly and accurately as I could, what Mr. Ose had told me. The door, the disappearance, Daniel's account of the other corridor, the voice that had said his name. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. That section of the corridor, she said finally. That charged section. Yes, I said. That is where the door was. Yes. She was quiet again. Then she said, with the deliberate care of someone choosing words exactly. I am glad to know this. I have lived with an unexplained thing for 9 years, and I have been making do with the absence of an explanation. Having the explanation, even an explanation like this one, is better. It is better to know. I agreed with her. I am going to go home, she said, and stand in that section of the corridor. And I am going to say something. What will you say? She smiled slightly. I don't know yet. The right thing. Whatever presents itself as the right thing. From the third floor had its own history. The first incident, 1994, the East Corridor. I spoke with an older man named Walter who had been in the building since 2001, which meant he had not been present during the 1994 incident but had arrived 7 years after it. There is a room on this floor, Walter said, that I have always thought about differently from the others. The East Corridor. He looked at me. The East Corridor. The far end. Something about that end of the corridor has always had a quality that the rest of the floor doesn't have. Not threatening. Not unpleasant. Simply different. More, I want to say more alive, but I know how that sounds. Mr. Ose would not find it an unreasonable thing to say, I said. Mr. Ose is a wise man, Walter said. He said something to me, years ago, that I've thought about many times. He said, the building remembers everything that has happened in it. I asked him what he meant. He said, not in the way a person remembers, not with retrieval or interpretation or narrative, but in the way that a material changes as a result of what it has been through. The building is different because of what it has experienced. The floors, the walls, the corridors. They are different from how they would have been if nothing extraordinary had happened here. Do you believe that? I asked. I believe that the east corridor of this floor is different from the west corridor, he said simply. I believe that the difference is real and not a product of my expectation. And I believe that the reason for the difference is something that happened there in 1994 that left a mark that has not faded in 30 years. He paused. Whether that is the building remembering, or whether it is something more fundamental, something about the place itself, the ground, the accumulated weight of acknowledgement that Mr. Ose described, I don't know. But the mark is there. I feel it every day. From the 6th floor. The 6th floor was the floor the elevator had gone to uninvited during the weeks of the door. I had been curious about this since it happened, and particularly curious because 2 of the 6th floor's apartments were vacant, and the vacant apartments were at the far end of the eastern corridor. A woman named Helen had lived on the 6th floor for 4 years. She was in her late 40s, worked in hospital administration, and had the matter-of-fact quality of someone whose professional life involves regular confrontation with things that are difficult. She had noticed the elevator behavior during the weeks of the door. It went to this floor twice that I saw, she said. Doors opened, nobody there, doors closed. The first time I assumed it was a malfunction. The second time, I was waiting for it and it opened without being called, and I got in and it went to the 4th floor, which is what I wanted anyway, so I didn't think much about it. Did you feel anything when the doors opened and the corridor was empty? She considered. The second time, she said. The second time I was standing here waiting for the elevator, and when the doors opened I looked at the corridor. And the corridor was empty, no one there, but I had the very strong sense that it had not been empty a moment before. That I had just missed someone. The specific feeling of a space that has just been vacated. Residual warmth, for want of a better word. Residual presence. Who did you think had been there? She looked at me steadily. No one I could name, she said. But I had the feeling that if I had looked half a second earlier, I would have recognized them. I thought about this. About the elevator arriving uninvited on the 6th floor and opening its doors on the empty corridor, and the specific feeling she described, the feeling of a presence just departed, of someone familiar who had been there and was gone. I thought about Advoa. About Mr. Ose, 81 years old, living alone in apartment 4, talking to a wall at the end of a corridor. I thought about what he had said. I think she is part of whatever is there. Part of the accumulated presence of everyone who has lived and died on this ground. And the elevator, rising uninvited to the 6th floor, opening its doors on an empty corridor, as if something wanted to look at the building from the outside of the floor it knew best. As if something was taking a tour. I did not say any of this to Helen. But I thought it, standing in the 6th floor corridor, looking toward the far end where the vacant apartments waited with their particular quality of suspended occupation, their rooms holding the shape of lives that had been lived in them and departed. The building remembers everything. Not in the way a person remembers. In the way a place does. From the 7th floor, the 7th floor was the highest. One vacant apartment, at the far west end. The view from the western corridor windows, which faced away from the city, was of the open ground behind the building, a narrow strip of grass, and the back of the adjacent building, unremarkable in every way except for the quality of the light on clear days, which had, on the 7th floor, a slightly different character from the light on the floors below, as if at this height it had shed something of its urban density and arrived at the windows with more of its original quality intact. A woman named Marjorie, in her mid-70s, had lived on the 7th floor for 22 years. She was the longest-serving resident on her floor, which gave her the same kind of authority Mr. Ose had on the 4th, the authority of someone who knows a place deeply, and whose knowledge is recognized by those around them. She was the only resident I spoke with who did not seem surprised by what I told her. She listened to the account of the door with the quality of someone receiving confirmation of something they have long suspected. I have lived in this building for 22 years, she said, when I finished. In that time I have had one experience that I have never been able to explain and have never tried very hard to explain, because the explanation, it seemed to me, was not the point. Tell me, I said. She was quiet for a moment. My husband died in this apartment, she said. Not dramatically, in his sleep, at 81, of natural causes, after a good life. I woke and he was gone. That is not the unexplained experience. That is the ordinary fact. She paused. The unexplained experience, she said carefully, happened approximately 6 months after his death. I was in the corridor, this corridor, the 7th floor, late in the evening, returning from the laundry room. And I was thinking about him, as I often did at that time. He had been such a specific presence in the world, so himself, that his absence had a shape to it, a specific silhouette, a negative space with his outline in it that I was constantly bumping against. I was thinking about him, and I was tired, and the corridor was quiet, and I stopped for a moment because I was tired. And I heard him. Not dramatically. Not a voice calling my name. A sound. A specific sound, a quality of the corridor's air changing in the way that it changes when another person is present in an enclosed space. The small adjustments of pressure and temperature and ambient sound that constitute the physical fact of another person's presence. Which I knew, after 50 years of marriage, in a very specific and personal way. He was in the corridor with me. Not visibly. Not in any way I could point to. But present in the way I have described. I did not speak. I stood very still. I waited. And after a time, perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps longer, the quality of the corridor returned to what it had been. Whatever had been present was no longer present. I went into the apartment. I sat down. I thought about it for a long time. And I decided. It was him. That is what I decided. That in the building where we had lived for 22 years, in the corridor where he had walked every day for 22 years, he was still present in some form. That the presence of the building held him as it holds everything that has passed through it. And that for 30 seconds, the membrane had been thin enough that I had felt it. She looked at me. I have lived with this decision for 15 years, she said. It has been, on the whole, a great comfort. Not because I think he is trapped somewhere, or incomplete, or waiting for anything. But because the idea that the building holds what it has known, that there is a form of persistence in place, in the walls and the corridors and the ground, is, to me, not a frightening idea. It is a generous one. It is the world being more generous than it needs to be. I thought of Advoa and the candle in the window. I thought of Daniel and the corridor with its older light. I thought of May, aged 4, putting her hand on the door and saying, "I know you are there." It is a very generous building, I said. Marjorie smiled. Yes, she said. That is exactly the word. Generous. A final observation. I have spoken with residents of all 7 floors of Arbor Court. I have spoken with the building manager. I have read the letters in the archive and the note in the manila envelope and the letter between the pages of the book. I have spent 15 months in apartment 4C in the building that was built on a crossing place. What I have found, across all of these conversations and readings and observations, is a pattern that I did not expect when I started looking for it. The pattern is this. The people who live in Arbor Court, over time, become more rather than less willing to attend to the building's quality. Not more credulous, not more superstitious, not more likely to interpret ordinary events as extraordinary, but more present, more attentive, more willing to stand in a corridor and feel what the corridor is without immediately reaching for an explanation. The building, in other words, teaches something. It teaches the specific skill that Elena named as peripheral vision. The skill of attending to what cannot be looked at directly. The skill of being present without requiring presence to be legible. This is not, I think, a skill that is unique to buildings built on crossing places. It is a skill that the world requires in general, that life requires, that grief requires, that love requires, that the ordinary inexplicable business of being alive requires. The world is full of things that cannot be looked at directly, that require peripheral vision, that resist the frontal attention of explanation and yield only to the sidelong attention of presence. What Arbor Court provides is a specific and embodied practice space for this skill. A corridor at the end of which is sometimes a door. A wall at the end of which is always, in some register that the attentive can feel, the edge of what is known. A building that says, daily, in its quality and its weight and its specific way of holding the light, there is more here than is visible. Look sideways. Feel what is there. Thank you for the practice. Thank you for the reminder. Thank you for being a building that is honest about what it contains. The door will come back. In 15 years, more or less. And whoever is here will stand in the corridor and feel it. And if they are lucky, if they are patient and attentive and willing to attend to what cannot be looked at directly, they will do what Mr. Ose did. They will walk to the end of the corridor. They will put their hand on the door. And they will say, "I hear you." And the door will glow its readiness. And the older light will be there on the other side. And the voices will clarify. And someone, behind some door in the other corridor, will hear their name. And be told, gently, lovingly, with the specific care of something that has been waiting, that they are early. That there is time yet. That when the time is right, the door will be there. As it has always been there. As it will always be there. On the other side of the wall. Afterward. On writing this account, there is a question I am sometimes asked when I describe what happened in Arbor Court in those 22 days in January. Why did you write it down? The question usually means one of two things. Either it means, why would you write down something so strange, something that resists the kind of verification that would make a written account meaningful? Or it means, wasn't it private in some way? Wasn't it something that belonged to the people who experienced it rather than to the wider world? Both questions are fair. I will try to answer them. To the first, I wrote it down because writing it down is how I process things. This is the journalist's discipline and also, I think, the more general human one. We write to understand what we have experienced. We write to make the lived thing available for examination, to slow it down, to hold it still long enough to see it from more than one angle. The act of writing does not add truth to an experience, but it can reveal what was there all along, the connections, the patterns, the meanings that the event itself contained but that only become visible in the retrospect that language provides. What writing this account gave me was a way of understanding what I had been through that I could not have reached by simply living with it. It gave me the architecture of the thing. The way the first week built toward the second, the way the second week built toward the third, the way Mr. Ose's testimony and Daniel's history, and the 1739 architect's letter and the building's decades of prior incidents all arranged themselves into a pattern whose shape was larger and older and more patient than I had understood while I was inside it. The writing gave me the structure. And the structure gave me something I was not expecting. Peace. Not the peace of resolution. The event did not resolve in the way that a problem resolves, into a clear answer that removes the question. The peace of understanding, which is a different thing. The peace of seeing the full shape of something and finding the shape, however strange, however inexplicable by ordinary standards, to be coherent. To have an integrity. To be, in its own terms, complete. To the second question, wasn't it private? My answer is this. It was. And the people whose experiences are documented here gave their permission for that privacy to be shared. But more than that, I believe that the specific kind of experience this account describes is one that benefits from being shared beyond the people who had it. Not because it requires validation from a wider audience, not because the sharing makes it more real, but because there are other people in other buildings who have stood in corridors in front of doors that should not be there, or felt the quality of a wall that was more than a wall, or heard something at 2 a.m. that was not the building's mechanical systems, and who have had no account to place their experience beside. I was one of those people before the door appeared. I had lived in apartments all my adult life and had occasionally, in the older ones, felt something of what I later learned to call the building's quality, a sense of accumulated presence, of the specific weight of a place that has been lived in for a long time and has absorbed that living. I had felt it and had attributed it to imagination, to the romantic associations of old architecture, to my own susceptibility. I had not had a framework for taking it seriously. This account is an attempt to provide a framework. Not a definitive explanation, I have none. Not a proof, I have none of that either. But a framework of serious attention. A way of saying, this kind of experience is real, is widely reported, has a history, and deserves something more than dismissal or embarrassment. The building knows. The wall at the end of the corridor is more than a wall. The door comes back. And when it does, whoever is there to receive it deserves to know that they are not alone in having received it. That someone was there before them. That someone is here with them, in the account, in the record. That the acknowledgement continues. That the door, when it appeared, was attended to with care and respect. And that the care and respect were returned. As they always have been. In this building built on a crossing place. In all the buildings built on crossing places. In all the thin spots, in all the walls, in all the corridors, in all the old places where the membrane is close. The door will come back. Be ready. Be present. Say, I hear you. It is enough. Image animation prompts for video production, WhisperVoid internal reference, background image prompt, 38402160px Midjourney or Dolly 3. Long institutional apartment building corridor at night, cream-painted walls, fluorescent lights casting cold white light, worn linoleum floor, numbered apartment doors on both sides, at the far end a single panel door with brass knob that was not there before, cream-painted, identical to the wall, almost invisible, a keyhole like a dark eye. Deep shadow at the far end. Empty corridor, not a person in sight. Ultra-realistic, photorealistic, cinematic, deeply atmospheric. Color palette. Cool institutional cream, cold fluorescent white, deep shadow. 16:9 widescreen, no text. Dash animation prompt, seamless loop 10-12 seconds, runway ML Kling AI 1.6. Seamless loop. Scene almost completely static. Empty apartment building corridor. No camera movement. No sudden changes. Only permitted motion. The single brass knob on the door at the far end very slowly, almost imperceptibly rotates 1 degree clockwise and returns 1 complete cycle every 12 seconds, as if tested by something from the other side. Fluorescent light above the far end door flickers once every 15 seconds, a single brief flicker, 1 frame, then steady again. All other elements completely frozen. Perfect seamless loop. No additional motion of any kind. Dash thumbnail prompt 1280720px ideogram.ai recommended for text. Long apartment building corridor at night. Cream walls, numbered doors, fluorescent lights. At the far end. A door that does not belong, cream-painted, panel construction, brass knob, barely distinguishable from the wall. From beneath the door. A thin line of different light, warm gold against the cold corridor floor. Cinematic, photorealistic, deeply atmospheric, no people visible. Upper portion. Large bold white sans serif text, 2 lines. The door at the end of the hallway was never there before. Dark drop shadow for readability. Bottom center. Small whisper void in thin pale gray. 16:9. No watermarks. No additional text. Dash video description YouTube. It appeared on the 22nd day of my residency. Not hidden in shadow. Not at the edge of visibility. At the end of the corridor, in plain institutional cream, with brass fittings and a locked door and a keyhole like a small dark eye, a door in a wall that had never had a door. Arbor Court is a mid-century apartment building on the eastern edge of a medium-sized city. It has been occupied continuously since 1961. And in that time, 3 times, a door has appeared in a wall where no door should be. This is the account of the 3rd time. This is the account of 38 residents. Of an 81-year-old man who has been waiting 36 years to say something to a wall. Of a 4-year-old girl who already knows when it will be her turn. Of a building manager who filed it under no action required, and of the architect who in 1739 wrote that the cost of accommodating what he called the crossing place was nothing, and chose to build around it. This is the account of the corridor beyond the door, and the older light, and the voice that told someone he was early. This is the account of a place that does not pretend this is all there is. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones. The door is waiting.